Welcome, Keeper of Justice, to a journey through the shadowed corridors of Gotham City, where the thin blue line becomes the only barrier between order and chaos, where one man's unwavering moral compass has guided generations of heroes through their darkest hours. Tonight, we shall explore the complete chronicles of James Gordon, the commissioner whose badge gleamed like a beacon in the perpetual night, whose partnership with a creature of shadows proved that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in supernatural power but in simple, unshakable integrity. Close your eyes, guardian of peace, and let these tales of duty and sacrifice unfold like the pages of a case file written in honor and heartbreak, illuminated by the eternal glow of a signal cast against storm clouds. In the beginning, when the world was younger and the shadows of Gotham had not yet learned to dance with creatures of the night, there lived a boy whose destiny would become forever intertwined with justice itself, though he knew it not. James Gordon entered this world in the industrial heart of Chicago during the 1920s, born into a family that understood the meaning of service, the weight of responsibility, and the sometimes cruel demands that honor places upon those who choose to carry its burden. His father was a man of modest means but immodest principles, a factory supervisor who believed that a day's honest work was its own reward, and that the measure of a person's worth could be found not in the size of their bank account, but in the strength of their character. The elder Gordon possessed the kind of quiet dignity that impressed itself upon young minds without the need for grand speeches or dramatic gestures, teaching through example that integrity was not a luxury to be discarded when times grew difficult, but rather the foundation upon which all meaningful life must be built. The household in which James Gordon spent his formative years was one where conversation around the dinner table often turned to questions of right and wrong, where current events were discussed not merely as entertainment, but as moral puzzles that required careful thought and principled analysis. His mother, a former schoolteacher who had abandoned her career upon marriage, as was expected of women in that era, brought to their home an appreciation for learning and critical thinking that complemented her husband's practical wisdom. The neighborhood where the Gordons made their home was neither wealthy nor destitute, but rather occupied that vast middle ground where most of humanity conducts its daily struggles with dignity and determination. Here, among families of factory workers and small shopkeepers, police officers, and postal clerks, young James learned the fundamental truth that would guide his entire career: that ordinary people possessed an extraordinary capacity for both good and evil, and that the choices made by individuals in moments of moral testing could reshape not only their own destinies but the fate of entire communities. The streets of Chicago in those days provided a young boy with ample opportunity to observe the complex dance between law and disorder that would later define his professional calling. The city was in the grip of prohibition, that grand social experiment that had transformed the consumption of alcohol from a legal pleasure into a criminal enterprise, creating opportunities for corruption and violence that infected every level of society. James watched with growing fascination as the adults around him navigated the complicated moral landscape created when well-intentioned laws collided with human nature and economic necessity. The police officers who walked their beats through James's neighborhood were figures of both authority and contradiction, men who were supposed to enforce laws that many citizens considered unjust while operating within a system that often rewarded compromise more generously than principle. Some of these officers were heroes in the truest sense, individuals who maintained their integrity despite enormous pressure to look the other way, or actively participate in the profitable business of selective law enforcement. Others were casualties of a system that made honesty seem like a luxury that few could afford. It was during these impressionable years that James Gordon first began to understand the crucial distinction between law and justice, between the letter of legal codes and the spirit of moral truth that should animate their enforcement. He observed that the most respected police officers in his community were not necessarily those who made the most arrests or generated the most revenue for the city coffers, but rather those who earned the trust and gratitude of the citizens they served through consistent demonstration of fairness, courage, and genuine concern for public welfare. The education that James received in the public schools of Chicago was typical for a boy of his background and era, emphasizing basic literacy and numeracy while providing rudimentary exposure to history, science, and civic responsibility. Yet his real education was taking place outside the classroom, in the streets and homes of his neighborhood, where he learned to read the subtle signs that distinguished honest citizens from criminals, fair authority figures from corrupt ones, genuine emergencies from manufactured crises designed to distract attention from more serious problems. The athletic pursuits that occupied much of James's free time during his adolescence provided him with more than mere physical conditioning, though his natural coordination and competitive drive made him successful in various sports. The team activities taught him valuable lessons about leadership and cooperation, about the importance of maintaining discipline and focus, even when circumstances became chaotic or discouraging. More importantly, they demonstrated that individual talent, however impressive, was meaningless without the support and trust of teammates who shared common goals and values. The work ethic that James developed during these formative years was influenced by both his father's example and the practical necessities of helping to support his family during the economic uncertainties that preceded the Great Depression. His after-school and summer jobs provided him with exposure to various aspects of urban life and commerce, from delivery routes that took him into both respectable neighborhoods and dangerous slums to construction projects that taught him about the physical processes by which cities grew and changed. The young man who emerged from this Chicago childhood possessed a character that had been shaped by exposure to moral complexity without becoming paralyzed by cynicism, by awareness of corruption without surrendering faith in the possibility of genuine reform. James Gordon understood that the world was neither as simple as idealists pretended, nor as hopeless as cynics claimed, but rather a place where good and evil existed in constant tension, with the ultimate outcome determined by the accumulated choices of individuals who chose to fight for their principles rather than surrender to expedience. The decision to pursue a career in law enforcement was neither sudden nor dramatic, but rather the natural culmination of years of observation and reflection about the problems that plagued modern urban society and the potential solutions that might be implemented by individuals with sufficient courage and determination. James had witnessed firsthand the damage that could be inflicted upon communities when police forces became corrupted by criminal influences or political pressures. Yet he had also seen examples of officers who maintained their integrity and effectiveness despite enormous obstacles. The police academy, where James Gordon received his formal training, was an institution caught between competing visions of what law enforcement should represent in a democratic society. The older instructors, veterans of an era when police work was largely a matter of maintaining order through the application of physical force and intimate knowledge of local conditions, emphasized practical skills and street wisdom that could only be acquired through experience. The younger faculty members, influenced by emerging theories about scientific investigation and professional law enforcement, stressed the importance of education, technology, and systematic approaches to crime prevention and detection. The curriculum that James encountered during his months of training attempted to balance these different philosophies while providing recruits with the basic knowledge and skills necessary to function effectively in urban police. departments, classes in criminal law and procedure, familiarized future officers with the legal framework within which they would be required to operate, while instruction in firearms, defensive tactics, and emergency response prepared them for the physical dangers they would inevitably face. Yet, the most valuable lessons that James learned during his academy training came not from formal instruction, but from conversations with fellow recruits and veteran officers who shared their experiences and insights during informal moments between classes and exercises. These discussions revealed the complex reality of police work in ways that no textbook could adequately capture, demonstrating how legal principles translated into practical decision-making under pressure, how theoretical knowledge of criminal behavior applied to actual encounters with dangerous individuals, and how the idealistic goals of law enforcement had to be balanced against the limitations imposed by politics, bureaucracy, and human nature. The graduation ceremony that marked the completion of James Gordon's police academy training was both an ending and a beginning, the culmination of months of intensive preparation, and the commencement of what he hoped would be a distinguished career in service to justice and public safety. As he took the oath that bound him to uphold the law and protect the innocent, James felt the weight of responsibility settling upon his shoulders, like a mantle that he would carry for the remainder of his working life. The early assignments that comprised James Gordon's introduction to active police work were deliberately chosen to provide him with exposure to the full range of challenges that urban law enforcement presented, while allowing him to develop his professional skills under the guidance of experienced partners. His first beat was in a mixed residential and commercial district where the crimes were typically minor, but the human dramas behind them were often complex and heartbreaking, requiring a police officer to serve simultaneously as enforcer, counselor, mediator, and sometimes simply as a representative of society's concern for those who found themselves in desperate circumstances. The domestic disturbance calls that occupied a significant portion of James's time during these early months taught him that the line between victim and perpetrator was often blurred, that violence frequently erupted from desperation rather than malice, and that the most effective police interventions were those that addressed underlying problems rather than simply punishing their symptoms. The burglary investigations that comprised another major category of his work demonstrated the importance of methodical evidence gathering and logical deduction, while also revealing the economic and social factors that drove ordinary citizens to risk imprisonment for modest financial gains. The veteran officers with whom James was partnered during his rookie years represented the full spectrum of approaches to police work, from cynical time servers who viewed their badges primarily as sources of modest authority and steady paychecks, to dedicated professionals who treated every case as an opportunity to make a meaningful difference in their community. The best of these mentors taught James that effective law enforcement required not only technical competence and physical courage, but also emotional intelligence, moral clarity, and the ability to maintain hope in the face of constant exposure to humanity's capacity for inflicting suffering upon itself. The corruption that James Gordon encountered during his early years on the Chicago police force was neither as dramatic as the gangster movies portrayed, nor as harmless as some of his colleagues pretended. It manifested itself in small compromises and selective blindness, in the acceptance of modest gratuities that created obligations to overlook minor infractions, in the understanding that certain establishments and individuals enjoyed unofficial protection in exchange for information or financial consideration. The moral testing that this environment provided forced James to define his own boundaries and principles at a stage in his career when the pressures to conform and fit in were strongest. He observed that officers who began their careers with the best intentions could gradually find themselves compromised through a series of small decisions that seemed reasonable at the time, but ultimately led them away from the integrity they had originally intended to maintain. The decision that James made to remain absolutely clean, to refuse any form of gratuity or special consideration, regardless of how harmless it might appear, was not motivated by self-righteousness or moral superiority, but rather by practical recognition that corruption was like a slow-acting poison that destroyed both individual character and institutional effectiveness. He understood that the respect and trust of honest citizens could only be maintained by officers who demonstrated unwavering commitment to impartial enforcement of the law. The reputation that James Gordon gradually developed within the Chicago Police Department was that of an officer who could be trusted to handle sensitive cases with discretion and competence, whose testimony would be believed by judges and juries, whose investigations would be thorough, and whose arrests would result in successful prosecutions. This reputation made him valuable to supervisors who needed reliable subordinates for important assignments, while also making him something of an outsider among colleagues who found his inflexibility inconvenient when it conflicted with their own more pragmatic approaches to law enforcement. The transfer opportunity that would eventually take James Gordon away from Chicago and toward his destiny in Gotham City arose from his involvement in a complex investigation that had exposed high-level corruption within the precinct department, while also demonstrating his own integrity and professional competence. The case had required months of careful work to build solid evidence against officers who had been accepting payment from criminal organizations in exchange for advance warning of planned raids and other law enforcement activities. The successful conclusion of this investigation had eliminated several corrupt officers while also creating enemies among those who remained but had managed to avoid prosecution. The department administrators who handled James's request for transfer understood that his continued presence in Chicago might create ongoing tensions and potential safety concerns, while his exemplary record and proven abilities made him an attractive candidate for other jurisdictions seeking experienced officers with unquestionable integrity. The city of Gotham, with its reputation for both wealth and corruption, its need for honest police officers, and its history of consuming the careers of those who attempted to reform its institutions, represented exactly the kind of challenge that appealed to James Gordon's sense of duty and desire to make a meaningful difference in the world. The position that was offered to him came with assurances of administrative support and promises of resources necessary to conduct effective law enforcement. Though he was experienced enough to understand that such promises were often easier to make than to keep, the decision to accept the Gotham assignment was influenced by practical considerations such as salary and benefits, as well as by James's recognition that his career had reached a point where continued advancement would require him to take on greater challenges and responsibilities, the opportunity to start fresh in a new environment, to build relationships, and establish his reputation without the baggage of past conflicts and compromises, was appealing to someone who had always been more interested in doing meaningful work than in playing political games. The farewell dinner that his Chicago colleagues organized to mark James Gordon's departure was both a celebration of his achievements and an acknowledgement that his rigid adherence to principle had sometimes made him a difficult partner for officers whose approach to law enforcement was more flexible. The speeches that were given in his honor praised his integrity and professional competence, while also expressing hope that his new assignment would provide him with opportunities to achieve the kind of impact that his talents deserved. The journey that took James Gordon from Chicago to Gotham City was more than simply a change of address. It represented his transition from promising young officer to seasoned professional ready to take on leadership responsibilities in one of the nation's most challenging law enforcement environments. The train that carried him eastward bore not only his possessions and official documents, but also his dreams, his principles, and his unwavering commitment to the belief that individual integrity could triumph over institutional corruption if applied with sufficient intelligence, courage, and persistence. The first glimpse that James Gordon caught of Gotham City as his train approached the central station revealed a metropolis that was both magnificent and menacing, its towering architecture speaking of great wealth and ambitious dreams, while its perpetual shadows hinted at secrets and dangers that lurked beneath the surface of civilized society. The Gothic spires and Art Deco facades that defined the city's skyline created a sense of grandeur that was both inspiring and intimidating, suggesting that this was a place where great deeds might be accomplished by those with sufficient vision and determination. The apartment that James had arranged to rent, sight unseen, proved to be modest but adequate, located in a neighborhood that was neither fashionable nor disreputable, but occupied that comfortable middle ground where honest working people could afford to live with dignity. The building itself was well maintained, and the other tenants appeared to be respectable citizens who minded their own business, while maintaining the kind of casual friendliness that made urban living tolerable. The Gotham City Police Department headquarters that would become James Gordon's professional home was housed in a building whose imposing architecture reflected the municipal ambitions of an earlier era, when public institutions were designed to inspire confidence and respect through their sheer physical presence. The marble corridors and high ceilings created an atmosphere of dignity and gravitas that seemed appropriate for an organization charged with maintaining law and order in a major metropolitan area. Yet the reality that James encountered during his first days on the Gotham police force proved to be far more complex and troubling than the impressive facade suggested. The corruption that he had witnessed in Chicago appeared almost quaint compared to the systematic criminality that had infected virtually every level of the Gotham City Police Department, from patrol officers who collected regular payments from criminal organizations to supervisors who actively participated in planning illegal activities. The organized crime families that controlled significant portions of Gotham's economy had achieved a level of integration with supposedly legitimate institutions that made traditional law enforcement approaches virtually useless. Police investigations were routinely compromised by officers who reported planned activities to criminal contacts. Evidence disappeared from storage facilities, and witnesses found themselves unable to testify due to mysterious accidents or sudden changes of heart. The political corruption that enabled this criminal infiltration of law enforcement extended throughout the city government, creating a system where honest officials were either marginalized or eliminated, while those who cooperated with criminal interests were rewarded with advancement and financial benefits. The mayor's office, the city council, and even the judicial system had been compromised to varying degrees, making it difficult for any single individual to achieve meaningful reform regardless of their position or authority. The discovery of the true extent of Gotham's corruption might have discouraged a less determined individual, but James Gordon viewed the situation as both a challenge and an opportunity. Here was a city that desperately needed the kind of honest, competent law enforcement that he was prepared to provide, a place where individual integrity might make a genuine difference in the lives of innocent citizens who deserved better protection than they were receiving from their supposedly public servants. The first major case that was assigned to Detective Gordon shortly after his arrival in Gotham involved a series of murders that had puzzled and frustrated the department for several months. The victims appeared to have nothing in common beyond their residence in Gotham City, and the crime scenes provided few clues that might lead to the identification of the perpetrator. Previous investigations had been hampered by jurisdictional conflicts, evidence tampering, and what appeared to be deliberate misdirection of resources away from promising leads. The methodical approach that James brought to this investigation reflected both his training and his natural temperament, emphasizing careful documentation of physical evidence, systematic interviews with witnesses and potential suspects, and logical analysis of patterns that might reveal the killer's motives and methods. His refusal to accept convenient explanations or ignore inconvenient facts gradually began to reveal connections and possibilities that earlier investigators had either missed or deliberately overlooked. The breakthrough that finally provided James with a viable suspect came through old-fashioned detective work rather than dramatic revelations or lucky breaks. By carefully mapping the locations and timing of the murders, analyzing the personal histories of the victims, and following up on seemingly minor inconsistencies in witness statements, he was able to identify an individual whose opportunity and apparent motive made him worth intensive investigation. Yet, the moment when James Gordon believed he had solved his first major Gotham case also marked his introduction to a phenomenon that would define the remainder of his career and fundamentally alter his understanding of what law enforcement could accomplish in a city where conventional criminals were only the beginning of the challenges that faced those who sought to protect the innocent. On the night when he planned to arrest his prime suspect, Detective Gordon encountered something that defied all his previous experience and training. A figure dressed as a giant bat who had apparently reached the same conclusions about the killer's identity and was prepared to take direct action to prevent further murders. The confrontation that followed between the experienced police detective and this mysterious vigilante established patterns that would govern their relationship for decades to come, as two men with fundamentally similar goals, but radically different methods attempted to find common ground in their shared commitment to justice, while navigating the complex moral and legal questions raised by vigilante activity in a democratic society. In the aftermath of cosmic upheaval, when universes collapsed into singular reality and infinite possibilities crystallized into one definitive timeline, there arose a need for new foundations upon which heroic legends could be rebuilt. The event that scholars would call Crisis on Infinite Earths had swept away decades of accumulated continuity, leaving creators with the unprecedented opportunity to reimagine their greatest characters from the ground up, to strip away the accumulated contradictions and complications that had grown like barnacles upon the hull of narrative coherence, and to craft origins that would serve as bedrock for generations of future stories. It was in this moment of creative rebirth that Frank Miller approached the task of reconstructing the Batman mythology with the precision of an architect and the soul of a poet. Understanding that any meaningful renovation of the Dark Knight's legend must begin with the man who had served as his anchor to the world of law and order, his bridge between the realm of shadows and the domain of daylight justice. The result would be Batman Year One, a masterwork that transformed James Gordon from supporting character into co-protagonist, elevating his story to equal importance with that of the vigilante whose career had become inextricably linked with his own. The James Gordon who emerged from Miller's reimagining was a figure of greater complexity and deeper humanity than any previous version. A man whose heroism was measured not in spectacular displays of physical prowess, but in the quieter courage required to maintain one's integrity when surrounded by corruption, to hold fast to principles when expedience offered easier paths, to choose the difficult right over the comfortable wrong, even when the consequences promised to be severe and immediate. This new Gordon arrived in Gotham City, not as a young rookie fresh from the academy, but as a seasoned police veteran whose years of service in Chicago had provided him with both the skills necessary to navigate a hostile environment and the hard-won wisdom to recognize corruption in all its subtle forms. His transfer to Gotham was motivated not by ambition or adventure, but by necessity, the inevitable result of an honest cop's collision with institutional criminality that had made his continued presence in Chicago problematic for superiors who preferred subordinates capable of selective blindness. The woman who accompanied Gordon on this journey into uncertainty was Barbara Keene, his wife of several years, and the carrier of their first child, a pregnancy that added layers of vulnerability and responsibility to an already precarious situation. Barbara represented everything that was worth protecting in Gordon's moral universe. The innocent life that gave meaning to his professional struggles and personal sacrifices. Yet her presence also created additional pressure as he faced the challenge of providing for his growing family, while refusing to compromise the principles that made him worthy of their love and respect. The apartment they rented in one of Gotham's middle-class neighborhoods was modest but clean, a temporary haven that would serve as their base of operations while Gordon established himself within the police department and Barbara prepared for the birth of their child. The furnishings were sparse and functional, reflecting both their limited budget and their uncertainty about how long this new assignment might last. Yet Barbara's talent for creating warmth and comfort from simple materials transformed the space into something that felt like home, despite its unfamiliarity. The Gotham City Police Department that welcomed James Gordon as a lieutenant was an institution whose reputation for corruption had become so entrenched that honest officers were viewed with suspicion rather than respect. Their integrity regarded not as an asset but as a liability that might interfere with the profitable relationships that many of their colleagues had cultivated with criminal organizations. The building itself reflected this moral decay, its once impressive facade marred by neglect and indifference, its corridors filled with the whispered conversations of men who had abandoned their oaths in favor of more immediate rewards. The partner assigned to Gordon for his initial orientation was Detective Arnold Flass, a man whose physical bulk and aggressive demeanor masked a character that had been thoroughly corrupted by years of accepting bribes, overlooking crimes, and actively participating in activities that transformed law enforcement from public service into criminal enterprise. Flass represented everything that Gordon despised about police corruption, yet their professional relationship provided him with invaluable insights into the extent and sophistication of the criminal networks that had infiltrated supposedly legitimate institutions. The first weeks of Gordon's tenure in Gotham were marked by a series of increasingly disturbing discoveries about the true nature of the organization he had joined, revelations that forced him to confront the possibility that his transfer had placed him in an environment where honest police work was not merely difficult, but potentially impossible. The evidence lockers had been systematically pillaged, crime scene investigations were routinely compromised, and witness statements were modified or disappeared entirely when they threatened to implicate individuals with sufficient influence to purchase protection. The breaking point in Gordon's relationship with his corrupt colleagues came during his third week on the force, when Flass attempted to involve him in a scheme that would have required him to accept payment in exchange for providing advance warning of planned drug raids to criminal organizations that would use the information to relocate their operations before law enforcement arrived. The refusal that Gordon delivered was both immediate and absolute, leaving no room for misunderstanding about his position regarding such activities. The retaliation that followed his rejection of corruption was swift and brutal, designed to demonstrate that honest cops who refused to cooperate with established systems would face consequences far more severe than simple ostracism or professional isolation. Flass and several other officers ambushed Gordon in a warehouse district, subjecting him to a beating that was intended to serve as both punishment and warning. a physical manifestation of the price that principled behavior carried in an environment where moral compromise had become the norm rather than the exception. Yet the violence that was meant to break Gordon's spirit instead strengthened his resolve, confirming his understanding that the battle for Gotham's soul would require weapons more sophisticated than simple adherence to departmental regulations and legal procedures. The injuries he sustained during the assault were painful but not permanent, while the knowledge he gained about his enemy's methods and capabilities proved invaluable as he began planning his own campaign against institutional corruption. The investigation that Gordon launched into the criminal activities of his fellow officers was conducted with the same methodical care that had characterized his most successful cases in Chicago, relying on careful documentation, systematic surveillance, and the patient accumulation of evidence that could withstand legal scrutiny. He understood that accusations without proof would be dismissed as the complaints of a disgruntled outsider, while solid evidence properly gathered and presented might provide the foundation for meaningful reform. The personal cost of this investigation was enormous, transforming Gordon's daily existence into a constant exercise in deception and vigilance as he maintained the appearance of routine police work while secretly documenting the crimes committed by his colleagues. The isolation was perhaps the most difficult aspect, as he found himself unable to trust anyone within the department while also being cut off from outside support networks by the nature of his undercover activities. The pregnancy that had initially filled Barbara with joy and anticipation gradually became a source of anxiety as she observed the changes in her husband's behavior and demeanor, the way his natural openness had been replaced by careful guardedness, his easy humor displaced by grim determination. She understood intuitively that Gordon was facing challenges more serious than routine job stress. Yet his necessary secrecy prevented him from providing the reassurance and explanation that their relationship required. The birth of James Gordon Jr. should have been a moment of pure celebration, the arrival of new life that would bind their family together and provide hope for the future. Instead, the event was overshadowed by Gordon's growing awareness that his investigation had reached a critical phase where decisive action would soon be required, where the safety of his family might depend on choices he would be forced to make in the very near future. The criminal conspiracy that Gordon's investigation had begun to uncover extended far beyond simple police corruption to encompass a network of relationships that linked law enforcement with organized crime, political machines, and supposedly legitimate businesses in ways that made traditional approaches to crime fighting virtually useless. The evidence he had gathered revealed systematic looting of the city treasury, protection rackets that operated with official sanction, and murder contracts that were fulfilled by individuals who carried badges and swore oaths to protect innocent life. The decision to approach federal authorities with his evidence was not made lightly, as Gordon understood that such a move would mark him as a traitor in the eyes of his colleagues, while also placing his family at risk of retaliation from criminal organizations that had invested heavily in maintaining their relationships with corrupt police officials. Yet the alternative of remaining silent would have made him complicit in crimes that violated every principle he had sworn to uphold when he accepted his badge and his responsibility to serve and protect. The federal investigation that resulted from Gordon's evidence gathering was conducted with appropriate secrecy and security measures, yet news of its existence inevitably leaked to individuals with connections throughout the law enforcement community. The revelation that an honest cop had been systematically documenting police corruption sent shockwaves through Gotham's criminal underworld, while also marking Gordon and his family for elimination by organizations that could not afford to allow such behavior to go unpunished. The safe house where federal marshals relocated the Gordon family was secure but sterile, a temporary refuge that provided physical protection while also serving as a constant reminder that their normal life had been suspended indefinitely. Barbara struggled to maintain routines for herself and their infant son while dealing with the psychological stress of knowing that their future depended on the outcome of legal proceedings that might take months or years to complete. The night that would forever change both Gordon's life and the destiny of Gotham City began like any other evening of protective custody, with federal agents maintaining their surveillance while the Gordon family attempted to find some semblance of normalcy within the constraints of their secured environment. The baby had finally fallen asleep after hours of restless crying. Barbara was reading in the bedroom, and Gordon was reviewing case files when the lights went out and the sounds of violence erupted from the corridor outside their door. The attack on the safe house was executed with military precision by individuals who possessed detailed knowledge of federal security procedures and access to weapons that exceeded anything normally available to street criminals. The agents assigned to protect the Gordon family fought bravely, but were overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower, their training and dedication proving insufficient against an enemy that had anticipated their tactics and prepared countermeasures accordingly. In the chaos that followed the initial assault, Gordon found himself forced to make impossible choices about protecting his family, while also attempting to preserve the evidence that represented months of dangerous investigative work. The attackers were clearly professionals rather than common criminals, their movements coordinated and their objectives specific rather than random, suggesting that this was not a robbery or act of revenge, but rather a systematic elimination of threats to powerful interests. The explosion that destroyed most of the safe house also created the opportunity for Gordon's escape with his wife and child, though the route to safety led through dark alleys and abandoned buildings where additional dangers might be lurking. The journey that followed tested every survival skill that Gordon had acquired during his military service and police training, while also revealing reserves of determination and resourcefulness that he had never been forced to access. The temporary refuge they found in an abandoned church provided a few hours of relative safety while Gordon attempted to assess their situation and plan their next moves. The evidence he had so carefully gathered was now largely destroyed. The federal agents who had been their protectors were dead or wounded, and the criminal organizations that wanted them eliminated were undoubtedly mobilizing additional resources to complete their mission. It was in this moment of desperation and apparent hopelessness that Gordon first encountered the figure that would transform both his understanding of justice and his approach to law enforcement in ways that would define the remainder of his career. The shadow that detached itself from the darkness of the church nave was neither federal agent nor criminal operative, but something unprecedented in his experience, a being whose very presence seemed to embody both hope and menace in equal measure. The Batman who revealed himself to Gordon that night was still a crude prototype of the legend he would eventually become. His costume improvised rather than perfected, his techniques experimental rather than refined, his understanding of his own mission still evolving through trial and error. Yet even in this early incarnation, the Dark Knight possessed a quality that commanded attention and respect, an absolute commitment to his cause that transcended normal human limitations and suggested possibilities that conventional law enforcement had never explored. The conversation that followed between the honest cop and the vigilante established the foundation for a partnership that would endure for decades, despite the fundamental tensions inherent in their different approaches to justice. Gordon's commitment to legal procedures and constitutional protections initially conflicted with Batman's willingness to employ methods that operated outside traditional frameworks, yet both men recognized in the other a kindred spirit whose dedication to protecting the innocent superseded personal comfort and conventional career advancement. The rescue of Gordon's family from their immediate danger was accomplished through a combination of Batman's unconventional tactics and Gordon's professional knowledge of police procedures and criminal behavior. The vigilante's ability to move unseen through urban environments and gather intelligence through sources unavailable to legitimate law enforcement complemented Gordon's understanding of legal requirements and bureaucratic processes, creating a synthesis that proved more effective than either approach could have achieved independently. The safe passage that Batman provided for the Gordon family to a new refuge was accompanied by information about the criminal conspiracy that had been targeting them, intelligence gathered through methods that no court would have accepted, but which revealed the true scope of corruption that had infected Gotham's institutions. The evidence was fragmentary and obtained through questionable means, yet it pointed toward possibilities for reform that might be achieved through careful coordination between official and unofficial approaches to justice. The decision that Gordon faced in the aftermath of his family's rescue involved fundamental questions about the nature of law enforcement and the acceptable limits of vigilante activity in a democratic society. The Batman's methods were undeniably effective, and his motives appeared to be genuinely altruistic, yet his willingness to operate outside legal constraints represented a challenge to the rule of law that Gordon had sworn to uphold throughout his career. The compromise that eventually emerged from their negotiations established protocols that would govern their future cooperation, while maintaining the independence that each required to function effectively within his chosen sphere of activity. Batman would continue to operate as a vigilante, but would respect certain boundaries regarding the use of lethal force and the treatment of suspects, while Gordon would provide unofficial assistance and information, while maintaining plausible deniability about the extent of their relationship. The return to active duty that followed Gordon's emergence from protective custody was marked by significant changes in both his status within the police department and his approach to law enforcement challenges that could not be addressed through conventional methods alone. The corruption that had previously seemed overwhelming now appeared manageable when viewed as part of a larger campaign that incorporated both official investigations and unofficial intelligence gathering. The partnership with Batman evolved gradually from crisis-driven cooperation to systematic collaboration, as both men learned to exploit their respective strengths while compensating for each other's limitations. Gordon's access to official resources and legal authority complemented Batman's freedom of movement and unconventional investigative techniques, creating possibilities for criminal justice that neither could have achieved independently. The criminals who had previously operated with impunity under the protection of corrupt police officials found themselves facing a new form of opposition that could not be purchased, intimidated, or eliminated through traditional methods. The combination of Batman's direct action and Gordon's procedural follow-up created a 1-2 punch that disrupted criminal operations, while also ensuring that those who were apprehended would face legitimate legal consequences rather than simply being released through corrupt judicial processes. The signal that would become the iconic symbol of their partnership was born from practical necessity rather than dramatic gesture, a simple spotlight fitted with a bat-shaped template that allowed Gordon to communicate with his unofficial partner without compromising either of their positions. The light that blazed across Gotham's skyline represented both a call for help and a promise of response, a covenant between the forces of law and the agents of justice that transcended normal institutional boundaries. The marriage that had sustained Gordon through the early challenges of his Gotham assignment began to show signs of strain as Barbara struggled to understand and accept the changes in her husband's professional relationships and personal priorities. The secrecy that was necessary to protect their unofficial partnership with Batman created distance between husband and wife that grew more pronounced as time passed, and Gordon found himself unable to explain the true nature of his work. The affair with Sarah Essen that developed during this period of marital difficulty was both symptom and cause of Gordon's growing isolation from normal human relationships. A connection with someone who understood the demands and dangers of police work without requiring explanations about the unconventional methods that had become central to his approach to law enforcement. Sarah was herself a veteran police officer whose integrity had kept her clean despite years of exposure to departmental corruption, making her a natural ally in Gordon's campaign for reform. The professional relationship that existed between Gordon and Sarah provided cover for their growing personal intimacy, while also creating additional complications as their involvement deepened beyond mere collegial cooperation. Sarah's insights into criminal behavior and bureaucratic politics proved invaluable to Gordon's ongoing investigations, yet her presence in his life also represented another factor that needed to be managed carefully to avoid compromising either their work or their safety. The dissolution of Gordon's marriage to Barbara was neither sudden nor acrimonious, but rather the inevitable result of two people growing apart under pressures that neither could fully explain or resolve. Barbara's decision to return to Chicago with their son was motivated by her recognition that Gotham had changed her husband in ways that made their previous relationship impossible to sustain, while Gordon's acceptance of her departure reflected his understanding that his chosen path required sacrifices that extended beyond his own comfort and safety. The custody arrangements that followed their separation were complicated by Gordon's inability to provide detailed explanations about his work situation and living conditions, factors that would normally be considered in determining the best interests of their child. The compromise that was eventually reached allowed for regular visitation rights while acknowledging that James Gordon Jr.'s primary residence would be with his mother in Chicago, away from the dangers and uncertainties that characterized life in Gotham City. The loneliness that followed Barbara's departure was offset somewhat by Gordon's deepening relationship with Sarah Essen, yet the nature of their work made normal domestic arrangements difficult, if not impossible, to maintain. Their partnership operated on multiple levels simultaneously, combining professional collaboration with personal intimacy in ways that created both strength and vulnerability as they navigated the complex challenges of reforming corrupt institutions while also building a life together. The criminals who had initially dismissed Batman as a temporary nuisance gradually came to understand that they were facing something unprecedented in their experience, a form of opposition that combined the resources and determination of legitimate law enforcement with tactical capabilities that exceeded anything they had previously encountered. The fear that began to spread through Gotham's underworld was not merely concern about increased arrest rates, but genuine terror at the prospect of facing an enemy who seemed to possess almost supernatural abilities. The success of the Gordon-Batman partnership in disrupting established criminal operations gradually attracted attention from higher levels of organized crime, leading to increasingly sophisticated attempts to eliminate both the honest cop and his vigilante ally. These efforts revealed the extent to which corruption had penetrated legitimate institutions, while also demonstrating the resilience and adaptability of their unofficial alliance in the face of escalating threats. The first year of Gordon's partnership with Batman established patterns and precedents that would define their relationship for decades to come, creating a model for cooperation between official and unofficial approaches to justice that proved both effective and sustainable, despite the inherent tensions and contradictions that it embodied. The transformation of both men during this crucial period reflected their mutual recognition that conventional approaches to crime fighting were inadequate in a city where corruption had become systemic and criminal organizations possessed resources that rivaled those of legitimate government agencias. The legend that began to grow around the Batman during this formative period was carefully cultivated by Gordon's strategic release of selected information to media outlets and criminal informants, creating an atmosphere of mystery and fear that multiplied the psychological impact of the vigilante's actual activities. The stories that circulated about Batman's capabilities and methods were often exaggerated or completely fictional, yet they served the important purpose of deterring criminal activity while also providing cover for the reality of their partnership. The year that would be remembered as Batman Year One concluded with the establishment of a new equilibrium in Gotham City, where corruption continued to exist but no longer operated with complete impunity, where criminal organizations remained active but faced unprecedented challenges from the coordinated efforts of honest law enforcement and vigilante justice. The foundation that Gordon and Batman had built together during those crucial 12 months would support decades of future cooperation, while also providing a template for other cities facing similar challenges with institutional corruption and organized crime. In the labyrinthine corridors of comic book continuity, where timelines fracture and reconverge like rivers meeting the sea, few relationships have endured the constant reshaping of reality with as much complexity and emotional resonance as the bond between James Gordon and the young woman who would become both his daughter and his greatest source of pride and terror. The story of Barbara Gordon's place in the Commissioner's life is itself a chronicle of how love transcends the boundaries of biology, how family is defined not by blood alone, but by the choices we make in moments of profound moral testing, and how the weight of protecting those we cherish can transform ordinary humans into heroes whose courage rivals that of any costumed crusader. The origins of Barbara Gordon's existence within the Gordon family mythology shift like shadows cast by flickering candlelight, each iteration of continuity offering different explanations for her presence, while maintaining the essential truth that she represented something precious and irreplaceable in James Gordon's understanding of what made life worth protecting. In the earliest telling of her tale, she emerged into the world as Gordon's biological daughter, the product of his marriage to a woman whose own story remained largely untold. A figure whose primary function was to provide the genetic foundation for a character whose true significance lay in her relationship with both her father and the masked vigilante who had become his most trusted ally. The Detective Comics issue 359 that marked Barbara Gordon's first appearance in the spring of 1967 introduced her not merely as another supporting character in the Batman mythos, but as a fully realized individual whose intelligence, determination, and moral clarity made her worthy of donning a costume and joining the battle against the forces that threatened to consume Gotham City in darkness and despair. The librarian by day and crime fighter by night who emerged from those pages possessed a complexity that transcended simple categories, embodying both the intellectual pursuits that her professional life demanded and the physical courage that her nocturnal activities required. The decision that led Barbara to adopt the identity of Batgirl was born not from traumatic loss or dramatic revelation, but from the more mundane yet equally powerful motivation of a young woman who had observed the work that her father and his mysterious ally were accomplishing and recognized that she possessed skills and capabilities that could contribute meaningfully to their mission. Her creation of the Batgirl persona represented neither rebellion against parental authority nor desperate attempt to gain attention, but rather the natural evolution of someone whose moral development had been shaped by exposure to genuine heroism and whose practical education had provided her with the tools necessary to translate idealistic impulses into effective action. The relationship between father and daughter that developed in the shadow of their respective commitments to justice was characterized by the kind of loving tension that defines all healthy families where individual members pursue their races. own paths while remaining bound together by shared values and mutual respect. Gordon's awareness of Barbara's dual identity fluctuated across different tellings of their story, sometimes presenting him as deliberately ignorant of her activities, and at other times acknowledging his complete knowledge of her dangerous second career while respecting her autonomy enough to avoid direct interference unless circumstances absolutely demanded parental intervention. The professional competence that Barbara demonstrated in her role as a librarian reflected the same methodical intelligence and attention to detail that made her effective as a crime fighter, proving that heroism could emerge from any background and that the skills required for protecting innocence were often the same ones that served more mundane but equally important social functions. Her ability to research obscure information, organize complex data, and maintain detailed records proved invaluable, both in her legitimate career and in her nocturnal investigations, demonstrating that intellectual pursuits and physical courage were complementary rather than contradictory aspects of human development. The costume that Barbara designed for her Batgirl identity reflected her understanding that effective crime fighting required not only physical protection, but also psychological impact, creating an appearance that would inspire confidence in innocent citizens while striking fear into the hearts of those who preyed upon the vulnerable. The bat symbol that adorned her chest served multiple purposes beyond simple identification with Batman's mission, functioning as both armor and emblem, protection and promise that justice had allies who would emerge from unexpected quarters when darkness threatened to overwhelm the light. The training regimen that Barbara developed to prepare herself for the physical demands of vigilante activity drew upon resources available to any determined individual willing to dedicate sufficient time and effort to personal development. Her martial arts instruction, weapons training, and conditioning exercises were pursued with the same systematic approach that characterized her academic and professional work, proving that extraordinary achievement was often the result of ordinary discipline applied with extraordinary consistency and determination. The first encounters between Batgirl and the criminal elements that plagued Gotham City revealed both her natural aptitude for crime fighting and her need to develop experience in situations where theoretical knowledge proved inadequate preparation for the chaotic realities of urban warfare. Her early victories were hard-won affairs that taught her valuable lessons about the difference between training exercises and actual combat, between anticipating danger and responding to immediate threats that materialized without warning or opportunity for careful planning. The partnership that gradually developed between Batgirl and the Batman was built upon mutual respect for each other's capabilities, rather than formal hierarchy or structured command relationships, reflecting Batman's recognition that Barbara possessed unique skills and perspectives that complemented his own, while also acknowledging her independence and right to pursue her mission according to her own moral compass and tactical preferences. Their cooperation evolved organically through shared experiences and successful joint operations rather than through explicit agreements or negotiated protocols. The psychological impact that Barbara's crime-fighting activities had upon her father was profound and multifaceted, combining pride in her achievements with terror at the risks she faced and frustration at his inability to protect her from dangers that she had chosen to embrace. Gordon's position as police commissioner provided him with detailed knowledge of the threats that stalked Gotham's streets, while his role as father made him acutely aware of his daughter's vulnerability despite her training and capabilities. The moral complexity that characterized Gordon's relationship with both Batman and Batgirl was magnified by the family connection that transformed abstract questions about vigilante justice into intensely personal concerns about the safety and welfare of someone whose life was precious beyond any professional or ideological consideration. The decisions he faced regarding how much support to provide, how much interference to permit himself, and how much knowledge to acknowledge required constant recalibration as circumstances changed and relationships evolved. The crisis that reshaped Barbara Gordon's origin story emerged from the same cosmic upheavals that had transformed her father's background. As writers and editors sought to create more coherent narratives that would serve future storytelling needs while preserving the essential elements that made these characters meaningful to readers who had invested years of emotional engagement in their fictional lives. The post-crisis continuity that emerged from this creative reconstruction presented Barbara not as Gordon's biological daughter, but as his niece, orphaned by tragedy, and adopted into his family through circumstances that demonstrated his capacity for love and sacrifice. The death of Gordon's brother and sister-in-law that created the conditions for Barbara's adoption was portrayed as one of those random tragedies that periodically shatter families and force survivors to reconstruct their lives around new realities and unexpected responsibilities. The automobile accident that claimed the lives of Barbara's biological parents was neither heroic nor meaningful, simply the kind of senseless loss that demonstrates the fragility of human existence and the importance of cherishing relationships while they endure. The decision that James Gordon made to adopt his orphaned niece was presented as both natural and inevitable, the response of a man whose moral development had been shaped by understanding that family obligations transcended legal definitions and biological connections. His willingness to assume responsibility for Barbara's care and upbringing reflected the same commitment to protecting innocence that motivated his professional career, while also acknowledging that some duties were too important to be delegated to institutional care or distant relatives. The practical arrangements that Gordon was forced to make to accommodate Barbara's presence in his household required significant adjustments to his personal life and professional routines, as he learned to balance the demands of single parenthood with the ongoing challenges of law enforcement in a city where corrupt officials and criminal organizations made even routine police work dangerous and unpredictable. The experience of raising a bright, independent young woman, while also serving as Gotham's primary law enforcement officer, provided Gordon with insights into the complexity of moral decision-making that proved valuable in both spheres of his life. The impact that Barbara's adoption had upon Gordon's marriage to Barbara Kean was both immediate and lasting, as the addition of a grief-stricken child to their household created stresses and demands that their relationship proved unable to withstand. The woman who had married a police officer, without fully understanding the implications of that choice, found herself overwhelmed by the reality of life, with someone whose work brought danger and uncertainty into their home on a daily basis, while the presence of an adopted daughter whose needs required constant attention made it impossible to maintain the kind of romantic partnership that had originally brought them together. The divorce proceedings that followed represented more than simple marital failure, but rather the inevitable result of two people discovering that their fundamental values and priorities were incompatible when tested by serious challenges and difficult circumstances. Gordon's commitment to his professional duties and his adoptive daughter proved stronger than his attachment to a marriage that had been based more on mutual attraction and social expectations than on genuine compatibility and shared vision for their future together. The custody arrangements that were negotiated during the divorce required careful consideration of what would serve Barbara's best interests, while also acknowledging Gordon's legitimate desire to maintain his relationship with his biological son, despite the geographical distance that would separate them. The compromise that was eventually reached reflected the complex realities of modern family life, while also providing a framework for future relationships that would preserve important connections despite changed circumstances. The household that Gordon established with his adopted daughter was characterized by the kind of structured freedom that allowed Barbara to develop her own interests and capabilities, while also providing her with the stability and guidance that any young person requires to navigate the transition from childhood to adult independence. The rules and expectations that governed their daily life were designed to promote responsible behavior and academic achievement, while also acknowledging that Barbara's intelligence and maturity made traditional authoritarian approaches both unnecessary and counterproductive. The academic excellence that Barbara demonstrated throughout her educational career reflected both her natural intellectual gifts and the disciplined study habits that Gordon encouraged through example and expectation rather than through direct supervision or external pressure. Her achievement in various subjects proved that she possessed the kind of broad-based intelligence that would serve her well regardless of whatever career path she eventually chose to pursue, while her extracurricular activities revealed interests and capabilities that extended far beyond conventional academic boundaries. The relationship between Gordon and his adopted daughter was characterized by mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than simple obligation or duty, demonstrating that families created through choice and commitment could be every bit as strong and meaningful as those based on biological connections. Their evening conversations about current events, moral questions, and practical problems revealed the depth of their intellectual compatibility, while also providing Barbara with exposure to the kind of ethical reasoning that would later influence her own approach to questions of justice and social responsibility. The knowledge that Barbara possessed regarding her father's work with Batman developed gradually through observation, deduction, and occasional direct evidence rather than through explicit revelation or formal briefing, reflecting Gordon's understanding that some secrets were too dangerous to share, while also acknowledging his daughter's intelligence and perceptiveness made complete concealment impossible. The unspoken agreement that developed between them regarding what could be discussed openly and what needed to remain private demonstrated their mutual understanding of the complexities that governed Gordon's professional life. The transformation of Barbara from adopted daughter to Batgirl represented the natural evolution of someone whose moral development had been shaped by exposure to genuine heroism, while her practical education had provided her with the skills and knowledge necessary to translate idealistic impulses into effective action. Her decision to assume a costumed identity reflected not rebellion against her father's authority, but rather emulation of his commitment to protecting innocence and serving the cause of justice through whatever means proved most effective. The discovery of Barbara's dual identity created for Gordon perhaps the most challenging moral and emotional crisis of his entire career, as he was forced to confront the reality that his beloved daughter had chosen to place herself in mortal danger on a nightly basis, while pursuing goals that he could not honestly oppose despite his terror at the risks she faced. The pride he felt at her achievements was balanced by anguish at her vulnerability, while his professional respect for her effectiveness was complicated by paternal desire to protect her from harm. The conversations that eventually took place between Gordon and Barbara regarding her activities as Batgirl were characterized by the kind of honest communication that their relationship had always featured, acknowledging both the legitimacy of her concerns about crime and injustice and the reality of the dangers she faced in pursuing her mission. Neither parent nor daughter attempted to deceive the other about the seriousness of her chosen path, yet both recognized that her commitment to justice was too fundamental to her character to be abandoned, simply because it involved personal risk. The practical arrangements that Gordon was forced to make to accommodate his knowledge of Barbara's vigilante activities included both official support through careful timing of police responses and unofficial assistance through strategic sharing of information that might help her avoid unnecessary dangers. His position as police commissioner provided him with resources and intelligence that could prove valuable to someone operating outside official channels, while his experience and judgment offered guidance that complemented her natural abilities and formal training. The new 52 continuity revision that restored Barbara's status as Gordon's biological daughter represented another attempt to simplify and clarify character relationships that had become unnecessarily complicated through decades of editorial changes and continuity revisions. The return to the original concept of Barbara as Gordon's natural child reflected recognition that the essential element of their relationship was the love and mutual respect that existed between them, rather than the specific circumstances that had brought them together. The reimagined origin story that emerged from this latest continuity revision presented Barbara Keene as a woman who had abandoned her family responsibilities when Barbara was still a child, creating circumstances that required Gordon to assume the role of single parent while also pursuing his demanding career in law enforcement. This version of events preserved the essential dynamic of Gordon as protective father while also acknowledging that some people prove inadequate to the demands that family life places upon them. The impact that this revised origin had upon Barbara's character development was significant but not fundamental, as her essential qualities of intelligence, courage, and moral clarity remained consistent regardless of the specific circumstances that had shaped her childhood and adolescence. The stability that Gordon had provided during her formative years was the crucial factor in her development, while the specific legal and biological details of their relationship were less important than the emotional reality of their bond. The ongoing relationship between Gordon and Barbara in the contemporary continuity continues to reflect the same themes of love, protection, and mutual respect that have characterized their interactions across all versions of their story, demonstrating that some human connections transcend the artificial boundaries imposed by editorial mandates and continuity revisions. Their shared commitment to justice and their mutual understanding of the costs that such commitment requires create bonds that remain strong, regardless of whatever specific challenges they face or whatever changes future storytelling needs might demand. The legacy of Barbara Gordon's place in James Gordon's life extends far beyond the specific adventures they have shared or the particular dangers they have faced together, encompassing broader questions about family, duty, sacrifice, and the ways that love can inspire ordinary people to attempt extraordinary things in service of principles they hold sacred. Their relationship serves as a reminder that heroism is often a family tradition, passed from one generation to the next through example and expectation rather than through formal instruction or explicit command. The evolution of their story across multiple continuities and creative teams demonstrates that some character relationships possess an essential truth that transcends the specific details of their fictional origins, touching something universal about the bonds between parents and children who share common values and mutual respect, despite the different paths their lives may take. The love between Gordon and Barbara, whether biological father and daughter or adoptive parent and chosen child, represents one of the most emotionally resonant elements in the entire Batman mythology, proving that family connections can provide both strength and vulnerability in equal measure. In the end, the various tellings of Barbara Gordon's origins serve primarily to illuminate different aspects of the same fundamental relationship, exploring how circumstances beyond our control can bring people together, while the choices we make determine whether those relationships flourish or fail. The continuing evolution of their story across decades of publication reflects both the creative possibilities inherent in serial fiction and the enduring appeal of characters whose humanity transcends the fantastic circumstances that surround their adventures. reminding readers that even in a world populated by costumed heroes and supernatural villains, the most powerful forces are often those that exist within the human heart. In the pantheon of stories that explore the darkest recesses of human nature and the resilience of the moral spirit when confronted with absolute evil, few narratives have achieved the psychological complexity and enduring impact of the tale that would come to be known as The Killing Joke, a masterwork of sequential art that stripped away the comfortable illusions that separate civilization from chaos, sanity from madness, hope from despair. The events that unfolded during that terrible night in Gotham City would forever alter the lives of everyone touched by their horror, while also revealing fundamental truths about the nature of heroism, the meaning of justice, and the terrible price that must sometimes be paid by those who refuse to surrender their principles, even when faced with the most extreme forms of psychological torture. The architect of this descent into nightmare was the being who called himself the Joker, though his true name had been lost to the same chemical accident that had transformed him from whatever he had been before into something that existed beyond the normal boundaries of human psychology and moral consideration. The clown prince of crime who emerged from Alan Moore's imagination was neither the relatively harmless prankster of earlier eras, nor the simple homicidal maniac that some writers had portrayed, but rather something far more disturbing and philosophically complex, a creature who had gazed into the abyss of meaninglessness and chosen to laugh rather than weep at what he had discovered there. The theory that drove the Joker's most elaborate and cruel scheme was deceptively simple in its formulation, yet profound in its implications for understanding the fundamental nature of human morality and psychological stability. He believed that the difference between sanity and madness, between heroism and villainy, between civilization and chaos, was nothing more than one bad day of sufficient trauma and horror that would strip away the comfortable delusions that allowed ordinary people to function in a world that was ultimately without meaning or justice. The experimental subjects that the Joker selected for his attempt to prove this theory were chosen with careful consideration for their symbolic significance and their potential to demonstrate different aspects of human response to extreme psychological pressure. Barbara Gordon represented innocence and youth, someone whose life had been shaped by privilege and protection from the worst aspects of human nature, whose faith in justice and heroism had never been tested by genuine trauma or loss. Her father embodied the forces of law and order that the Joker viewed as elaborate self-deceptions designed to mask the fundamental chaos that governed all existence. The preparations that the Joker made for his grand experiment required months of careful planning and resource gathering. As he assembled the materials and personnel necessary to create an environment where psychological torture could be conducted with scientific precision and artistic flair, the abandoned amusement park that he selected as his laboratory was perfectly suited to his purposes. Its decaying rides and broken attractions providing both practical facilities and symbolic commentary on the illusory nature of human happiness and security. The carnival atmosphere that the Joker created for his twisted demonstration was designed to emphasize the absurdity of existence, while also providing a framework for systematic degradation of his victim's sense of dignity and self-worth. The funhouse mirrors that distorted reality, the recorded laughter that mocked genuine emotion, the garish colors that transformed beauty into grotesquerie, all served to create an environment where normal psychological defenses would prove inadequate against the sustained assault on sanity and hope. The evening that would become legend in the annals of horror began with Barbara Gordon's return from her work at the Gotham City Library, where she had spent the day helping citizens find information and resources that would improve their lives and expand their understanding of the world around them. Her professional dedication to education and public service reflected the same commitment to helping others that had motivated her decision to assume the identity of Batgirl, demonstrating that heroism could manifest itself in quiet daily service as well as dramatic nighttime confrontations with criminal elements. The domestic routine that Barbara had established in her father's apartment provided her with stability and comfort that served as counterpoint to the dangers and uncertainties that characterized her secret career as a patient crime fighter. The simple pleasures of preparing dinner, reading the evening news, and enjoying quiet conversation with her father represented normalcy and peace that made the risks of her nocturnal activities seem worthwhile, proving that even heroes needed refuge from the constant demands of their calling. The knock at the door that interrupted their evening meal carried no warning of the catastrophe that was about to unfold, appearing to be nothing more than an ordinary social call or routine business matter that required Gordon's attention in his capacity as police commissioner. The decision to answer the door without taking special precautions reflected their reasonable assumption that their home address was not generally known to criminal elements, and that any genuine threat would have manifested itself through more obvious means. The moment when the Joker's gun discharged and Barbara Gordon crumpled to the floor marked a fundamental shift in the moral landscape of Gotham City, transforming what had been a theoretical conflict between order and chaos into a deeply personal assault on everything that James Gordon held sacred. The sound of the gunshot echoed not only through their apartment, but through the foundations of their family's sense of security and their faith in the possibility that good people could live peaceful lives even in a city plagued by criminal violence. The paralysis that resulted from the Joker's carefully aimed bullet was both a physical condition and a symbolic representation of the helplessness that evil sought to impose upon its victims, stripping away not only mobility, but also agency, independence, and the capacity to resist further degradation. The precision of the shot that severed Barbara's spinal cord without causing immediate death demonstrated the Joker's twisted expertise in inflicting maximum psychological damage while ensuring that his victim would survive to experience the full horror of her transformed circumstances. The costume that the Joker donned for his role as ringmaster of this circus of suffering was more elaborate and theatrical than his usual appearance, incorporating elements of classic carnival barkers and vaudeville performers, while also referencing undertakers and other figures associated with death and transition. The grotesque makeup that transformed his already disturbing features into something even more unsettling served both practical and psychological purposes, creating a visual representation of madness while also dehumanizing the perpetrator in ways that made his actions seem even more horrific. The photographs that the Joker took of Barbara's wounded and helpless form were intended to serve as more than mere documentation of his crime, but rather as instruments of psychological warfare designed to break her father's spirit through enforced witnessing of his daughter's humiliation and suffering. The act of photography itself became a form of violation, transforming private trauma into public spectacle, while also creating permanent records of victimization that could be used for ongoing torment. The transportation of Gordon from his home to the amusement park was conducted with theatrical ceremony designed to emphasize his powerlessness and vulnerability, while also building anticipation for the ordeal that awaited him at their destination. The journey through Gotham's darkened streets provided opportunities for the Joker to deliver philosophical monologues about the nature of sanity and the inevitability of madness, while his captive audience was forced to listen without possibility of escape or effective response. The cage in which Gordon found himself imprisoned upon arrival at the amusement park was both literally confining and symbolically significant, representing the trap in which all law-abiding citizens supposedly lived without recognizing the bars that constrained their freedom and the arbitrary nature of the forces that controlled their destiny. The crude construction and uncomfortable dimensions of his prison emphasized the Joker's contempt for human dignity, while also serving practical purposes of restraint and humiliation. The strip club atmosphere that the Joker created around Gordon's cage was designed to assault his sense of propriety and moral order, while also demonstrating the criminal's power to transform anything, even the most sacred relationships, into objects of degradation and ridicule. The performers who had been coerced or hired to participate in this spectacle were themselves victims of the Joker's manipulation, their presence serving to illustrate how evil corrupted everything it touched, while also multiplying the psychological impact of the assault on Gordon's values. The slideshow that served as the centerpiece of the Joker's psychological torture was perhaps the most fiendish element of his entire scheme, forcing a loving father to witness his daughter's suffering while being powerless to help her, or even to look away from images that burned themselves into his memory with traumatic permanence. Each photograph in the sequence was carefully chosen and arranged to maximize emotional impact, while also building toward a climax of despair that was intended to shatter Gordon's psychological defenses completely. The monologue that the Joker delivered during this exhibition revealed the philosophical framework that justified his actions in his own twisted mind, presenting himself not as a simple criminal seeking personal gain, but rather as a teacher whose harsh methods were necessary to demonstrate important truths about the human condition that society preferred to ignore. His arguments possessed a seductive logic that made them even more dangerous, offering explanations for suffering that seemed to make sense while also undermining faith in justice, meaning, and the possibility of genuine heroism. The carnival rides that provided the backdrop for Gordon's torment were themselves symbols of the artificial thrills and manufactured excitement that the Joker viewed as humanity's pathetic attempts to create meaning in a meaningless universe. The broken-down machinery and faded decorations spoke to the inevitable decay that claimed all human achievements, while the distorted music and mechanical laughter created an atmosphere of celebration that mocked the very idea that life contained anything worth celebrating. The psychological techniques that the Joker employed during his extended assault on Gordon's sanity drew upon centuries of accumulated knowledge about human vulnerability and the methods by which individual will could be broken through systematic application of stress, humiliation, and despair. The sleep deprivation, sensory overload, and forced witnessing of traumatic images were calculated to produce specific responses, while also demonstrating the captor's complete control over his victim's experience and environment. The resistance that Gordon offered to this psychological bombardment was not the dramatic defiance of action heroes, but rather the quiet determination of someone whose principles had been tested by decades of exposure to human evil and found to be unbreakable. His refusal to surrender his sanity or abandon his moral compass demonstrated that some forms of strength could not be measured in physical terms, but resided in the deeper structures of character and belief that defined individual identity. The hours that passed in that carnival of horrors tested not only Gordon's psychological endurance, but also his fundamental understanding of justice, mercy, and the proper response to evil that exceeded normal human comprehension. The temptation to embrace hatred and desire for revenge was constant and powerful, yet Gordon's training and experience as a police officer provided him with resources for maintaining perspective and emotional control, even under extreme duress. The arrival of Batman at the amusement park marked the beginning of the end for the Joker's experiment. Though the rescue that followed was neither swift nor simple, but rather required the Dark Knight to navigate a maze of psychological traps and physical dangers, while also confronting his own response to the horror that had been inflicted upon people he cared about deeply. The rage that burned within Batman's heart as he witnessed the results of the Joker's handiwork threatened to overwhelm the moral restraints that normally governed his actions. The confrontation between Batman and the Joker that climaxed their encounter was simultaneously physical and philosophical, as two irreconcilable worldviews clashed in combat that was about much more than simply apprehending a criminal or rescuing victims. The Dark Knight's commitment to preserving life, even when faced with someone who seemed to embody pure evil, was tested against the Joker's argument that morality was merely a social construct that crumbled under sufficient pressure. The condition in which Batman found Gordon after his ordeal was both heartening and heartbreaking, revealing a man who had maintained his essential humanity despite experiencing torture that might have broken anyone else, while also bearing psychological wounds that would never completely heal. The Commissioner's insistence that his rescue be conducted by the book demonstrated that his commitment to legal procedure and constitutional protections had survived intact despite everything he had endured. The medical treatment that Barbara Gordon received following her rescue represented the beginning of a long and difficult journey toward accepting her transformed circumstances, while also discovering new ways to contribute to the cause of justice despite her physical limitations. The doctors who worked to stabilize her condition and maximize her remaining capabilities provided hope for adaptation and recovery, even as they acknowledged that some aspects of her former life would never be restored. The hospital room where Barbara began her recovery became a symbol of resilience and determination as she confronted the reality of her paralysis, while also beginning to envision new possibilities for serving others and fighting against the forces of evil that had sought to destroy her spirit along with her mobility. The visits from family and friends provided emotional support, while also demonstrating that heroism inspired loyalty and love that transcended physical capability or personal suffering. The wheelchair that would become Barbara's new means of mobility was initially viewed as a symbol of limitation and loss, yet her eventual mastery of its operation and incorporation into her identity as Oracle proved that technological assistance could amplify rather than diminish human capability when guided by sufficient intelligence and determination. The transition from Batgirl to Oracle represented not abandonment of her heroic calling, but rather evolution into new forms of service that utilized her intellectual gifts in unprecedented ways. The information networks that Barbara developed during her recovery provided her with new methods for fighting crime and supporting other heroes, while also creating resources that proved invaluable to law enforcement agencies throughout the world. Her transformation into Oracle demonstrated that physical disability need not prevent someone from making crucial contributions to the cause of justice, while also providing inspiration to others who faced similar challenges in their own lives. The psychological counseling that both Gordon and Barbara underwent following their traumatic experience provided professional support for processing their ordeal, while also offering insights into the resilience of human spirit and the Comtrian's capacity for growth that could emerge from even the most horrible circumstances. The therapeutic relationship required careful balance between acknowledging genuine trauma and maintaining focus on future possibilities for healing and meaningful activity. The impact that the Joker's attack had upon the broader community of Gotham's heroes extended far beyond its immediate victims to encompass everyone who understood that the assault on the Gordon family represented an escalation in the war between order and chaos that threatened to transform their city into a battlefield where no one would be safe from the most extreme forms of violence and psychological warfare. The security measures that were implemented to protect other potential targets reflected hard-won understanding that the Joker's philosophy of proving universal vulnerability through one bad day made everyone associated with law enforcement or heroic activity legitimate targets for future attacks designed to demonstrate the fragility of sanity and the inevitability of moral collapse under sufficient pressure. The investigation that followed the amusement park incident revealed the extensive planning and resource gathering that had been required for the Joker's scheme, providing insights into his methods and capabilities, while also demonstrating the sophisticated support networks that enabled such complex criminal operations to succeed despite the vigilance of law enforcement and heroic opposition. The legal proceedings that addressed the Joker's crimes were complicated by his obvious mental illness and the complex questions surrounding criminal responsibility for actions committed by someone whose psychological condition placed him outside normal categories of moral judgment. The insanity defense that protected him from execution or conventional imprisonment reflected society's recognition that some forms of evil transcended simple criminality, while also ensuring that he would remain a threat to public safety indefinitely. The Arkham Asylum cell that became the Joker's temporary residence provided neither punishment nor rehabilitation, but rather containment of someone whose very existence posed ongoing challenges to the assumptions upon which civilized ongoing society was built. The psychiatric treatment that he received was hampered by his fundamental inability to acknowledge the reality of other people's suffering or the legitimacy of moral constraints on individual behavior. The philosophical questions raised by the Killing Joke incident continued to resonate long after the immediate crisis had passed, forcing everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil, the sources of human resilience, and the meaning of heroism in a world where good intentions were no guarantee against suffering or loss. The story served as a reminder that heroism was measured not by invulnerability, but by the willingness to maintain one's principles, despite experiencing the worst that human nature could inflict. The recovery process that followed required not only physical rehabilitation and psychological counseling, but also spiritual renewal and recommitment to the values that had originally motivated the choice to serve others despite personal risk. The strength that emerged from surviving the Joker's test proved that some forms of human resolve could not be broken by external pressure, no matter how extreme or carefully applied. The transformation of trauma into wisdom represented perhaps the most meaningful victory over the Joker's philosophy, demonstrating that suffering need not lead inevitably to madness or moral collapse, but could instead become the foundation for deeper understanding and more effective service to others facing similar challenges. The lessons learned through surviving evil's worst assault would inform future efforts to protect innocence and preserve the possibility of justice in an unjust world. The legacy of the Killing Joke extended far beyond its immediate participants to influence an entire generation of heroes and citizens who understood that their freedom and safety depended upon the willingness of individuals to maintain their humanity, even when faced with forces that sought to strip away everything that made life meaningful and worthwhile. The story became a testament to the power of moral courage and the indomitable nature of the human spirit when guided by principles that transcended personal comfort and individual survival. In the tapestry of human emotion, few threads are woven with colors as vibrant and complex as those that bind two souls together in the sacred covenant of marriage, yet fewer still prove strong enough to withstand the pressures that extraordinary circumstances can place upon even the most devoted partnerships. The love story of James Gordon and Sarah Essen began in the shadows of professional duty and blossomed into something that promised to illuminate the darkness that had claimed so much of his personal happiness. Yet their journey together would ultimately become a testament to both the transformative power of genuine affection and the terrible price that must sometimes be paid by those who choose to love heroes whose calling places them perpetually in harm's way. The woman who would capture James Gordon's heart and challenge his understanding of what marriage could mean entered his life not as a romantic interest, but as a fellow professional whose dedication to law enforcement matched his own. While her perspective on justice had been shaped by experiences that complemented rather than duplicated his own moral development, Sarah Essen possessed the rare combination of strength and sensitivity that enabled her to function effectively within the masculine culture of police work, while maintaining the emotional intelligence and intuitive understanding of human nature that made her an exceptional investigator and a natural partner for someone whose own gifts lay in similar areas. The initial encounters between Gordon and Sarah took place within the context of joint investigations and departmental meetings, where their professional competence and shared commitment to honest police work created a foundation of mutual respect that would later support deeper forms of intimacy. The corruption that plagued the Gotham City Police Department made it difficult to identify colleagues who could be trusted with sensitive information or relied upon for support during dangerous operations. Yet both Gordon and Sarah quickly recognized in each other the integrity and capability that had become increasingly rare within their organization. The attraction that developed between them was neither sudden nor inappropriate, but rather the natural evolution of professional admiration into personal affection, as they spent increasing amounts of time working together on cases that required the kind of careful coordination and absolute trust that could only exist between individuals who understood and respected each other's capabilities and limitations. Their partnership proved more effective than either could have achieved independently, demonstrating that some forms of human connection enhanced rather than compromised professional performance. The complexity of their relationship was magnified by Gordon's existing marriage to Barbara Kean, a union that had already been strained by the demands of his career and his growing involvement with Batman's unofficial war against organized crime. The arrival of Sarah Essen in his professional life occurred at a moment when his personal relationships were already under enormous pressure, creating circumstances where emotional needs that were not being met within his marriage might naturally seek fulfillment through other connections. The ethical dimensions of their developing relationship required both Gordon and Sarah to navigate carefully between their genuine feelings for each other and their shared commitment to maintaining professional standards and personal integrity. The police department's policies regarding romantic relationships between colleagues were designed to prevent conflicts of interest and maintain discipline within the ranks. Yet these regulations had been crafted with conventional partnerships in mind, rather than the complex realities of individuals whose work placed them in constant danger, while also demanding absolute trust and loyalty. The discretion that both Gordon and Sarah maintained regarding their growing attachment reflected their understanding that their relationship could be used as a weapon against them by corrupt colleagues who might seek to exploit any perceived vulnerability or irregularity in their behavior. The careful balance they maintained between professional cooperation and personal connection required constant vigilance and self-discipline. Yet the strength they drew from their partnership made the effort worthwhile despite its obvious challenges and limitations. The investigation that first brought them together as full partners involved a series of crimes that had baffled other detectives, while also revealing connections between supposedly legitimate businesses and criminal organizations that operated with apparent immunity from law enforcement interference. The methodical approach that both Gordon and Sarah brought to this case demonstrated their shared commitment to thorough investigation and proper procedure, while also revealing the complementary nature of their analytical skills and investigative instincts. The breakthrough that finally provided them with actionable evidence came through the patient accumulation of seemingly minor details that formed a pattern visible only to investigators with sufficient experience and determination to pursue leads that other officers had dismissed as irrelevant or too time-consuming to follow properly. The satisfaction they shared in solving a complex puzzle through careful teamwork created bonds that transcended simple professional cooperation, while also providing them with insights into each other's character and capabilities. The success of their joint investigation attracted attention from both honest colleagues who recognized the value of their partnership and corrupt officials who viewed their effectiveness as a potential threat to profitable arrangements with criminal organizations. The commendations they received for their work were balanced by subtle warnings and veiled threats that reminded them that excellence in police work could be as dangerous as incompetence when it conflicted with institutional priorities that had been shaped by criminal influence. The personal relationship that developed parallel to their professional partnership was characterized by the kind of deep communication and emotional intimacy that both had been missing from other areas of their lives, providing them with refuge from the isolation and cynicism that threatened to consume anyone who spent years confronting human evil without adequate support and understanding. Their conversations ranged across topics that extended far beyond police work to encompass philosophy, literature, politics, and personal dreams that had been deferred or abandoned due to career demands. The intellectual compatibility that drew them together was matched by physical attraction that made their connection even more compelling, while also creating additional complications as they struggled to maintain appropriate boundaries within their professional environment. The chemistry between them was obvious to perceptive observers, yet subtle enough to avoid creating scandal or providing ammunition for enemies who might seek to use their relationship against them. The dissolution of Gordon's marriage to Barbara Keene was neither sudden nor directly caused by his relationship with Sarah, but rather the inevitable result of two people growing apart, under pressures that neither could adequately address within the framework of their existing commitment. The distance that had developed between husband and wife reflected fundamental incompatibilities that had been masked during their courtship by mutual attraction and shared hopes for the future, yet which proved insurmountable when tested by the realities of life in Gotham City. The divorce proceedings that followed were conducted with dignity and mutual respect, despite the pain and disappointment that both parties experienced as their marriage officially ended. The custody arrangements for their son were negotiated with consideration for what would serve the child's best interests, while also acknowledging both parents' legitimate desire to maintain meaningful relationships with him, despite the geographical separation that would result from Barbara's return to Chicago. The freedom that divorce provided allowed Gordon and Sarah to pursue their relationship openly, while also creating new pressures and expectations as they navigated the transition from secret affair to public partnership. The reactions of their colleagues ranged from supportive acceptance to barely concealed disapproval, reflecting the complex social dynamics that governed personal relationships within law enforcement organizations, where individual behavior could affect group cohesion and operational effectiveness. The wedding that united Gordon and Sarah took place in a simple ceremony that reflected their shared preference for substance over spectacle, while also acknowledging the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. The guests who attended their celebration included honest police officers and federal agents who understood the challenges they faced, while also representing the broader community of individuals committed to justice and reform within corrupt institutions. The partnership that had begun within the professional sphere evolved into a marriage that combined personal intimacy with continued professional cooperation. As both Gordon and Sarah advanced within the police department while maintaining their commitment to honest law enforcement, despite ongoing pressures from criminal organizations and corrupt colleagues, their shared experiences and mutual support created a foundation strong enough to sustain them through challenges that might have overwhelmed individuals facing such difficulties alone. The honeymoon period that followed their marriage was brief, interrupted by crises that demanded their immediate attention and reminded them that their chosen profession left little room for conventional domestic arrangements or extended periods of personal happiness, uninterrupted by professional obligations. The cases that required their joint attention during these early months of marriage tested both their relationship and their investigative skills, while also revealing new dimensions of their partnership that enhanced their effectiveness as both spouses and police officers. The questions that Sarah began to raise about Gordon's relationship with Batman reflected her growing awareness that her husband's commitment to justice extended beyond conventional law enforcement into areas that raised complex, ethical, and legal questions about the proper limits of police cooperation with vigilante activities. Her concerns were motivated not by disapproval of Batman's methods or goals, but rather by understanding that such partnerships could create vulnerabilities and complications that might ultimately compromise both their safety and their effectiveness. The discussions that followed these inquiries revealed fundamental differences in their approaches to the moral ambiguities that characterized police work in a city where conventional methods had proven inadequate against sophisticated criminal organizations with unlimited resources and political protection. Sarah's preference for working within established legal frameworks conflicted with Gordon's recognition that extraordinary circumstances sometimes required extraordinary measures that operated outside traditional boundaries. The strain that these philosophical differences placed upon their marriage was compounded by practical concerns about the risks that Gordon's unofficial partnership with Batman created for both of them as individuals and as a family unit. Sarah's training and experience as a police officer made her acutely aware of the potential consequences when law enforcement officials became too closely associated with individuals whose methods could not withstand legal scrutiny or public examination. The attempts that both Gordon and Sarah made to reconcile their different perspectives on these issues demonstrated their mutual commitment to preserving their marriage, while also maintaining their individual integrity and professional effectiveness. The compromises they negotiated required careful balance between competing priorities and values, while also acknowledging that some differences might prove impossible to resolve completely, despite their best efforts and genuine love for each other. The evolution of Gotham City during this period reflected broader social and economic changes that created new challenges for law enforcement, while also providing opportunities for criminal organizations to expand their influence and sophistication. The urban decay that characterized many neighborhoods was matched by gleaming new developments that attracted legitimate businesses, while also providing cover for money laundering operations and other forms of financial crime that proved difficult to investigate and prosecute successfully. The earthquake that struck Gotham represented a natural disaster of unprecedented scope and devastation, yet its true significance lay not in the immediate physical damage, but in the social and political consequences that followed, as federal and state authorities struggled to respond effectively to a crisis that exceeded their resources and capabilities. The breakdown of normal governmental functions created conditions where unofficial authorities and alternative power structures could emerge to fill the vacuum left by the collapse of conventional institutions. The federal decision to abandon Gotham City and declare it a disaster zone beyond salvation reflected political calculations and bureaucratic limitations rather than genuine assessment of the situation's potential for improvement. Through sustained effort and adequate resources, the withdrawal of official support created circumstances where the city's remaining population would be forced to develop new forms of organization and cooperation, while also defending themselves against criminal elements who viewed the crisis as an opportunity for expansion and conquest. The transformation of Gotham into no man's land represented both catastrophe and opportunity, creating conditions where heroes and villains alike would be tested by circumstances that exceeded anything they had previously encountered, while also revealing the true character and capabilities of individuals who had been shaped by years of preparation for exactly this kind of extreme challenge. The absence of external authority and support made individual choices and personal courage more significant than ever before. The role that Gordon assumed during the no man's land period reflected his natural leadership abilities and his understanding that effective law enforcement required adaptation to changing circumstances while maintaining commitment to fundamental principles of justice and protection of innocent life. His efforts to organize resistance against criminal organizations and provide security for vulnerable populations demonstrated that heroism could manifest itself through administrative skill and tactical planning, as well as through direct confrontation with dangerous opponents. The partnership between Gordon and Batman evolved during this crisis into something approaching true military alliance, as both men recognized that the scale and complexity of the challenges they faced required unprecedented levels of cooperation and resource sharing. The informal protocols that had previously governed their relationship were replaced by more systematic coordination as they worked to establish zones of safety and stability within the chaos that had claimed most of the city. The police officers who remained loyal to Gordon during this period represented the best of law enforcement tradition, individuals whose commitment to serving and protecting transcended personal comfort and career advancement to encompass genuine dedication to the welfare of their community. Their willingness to continue functioning as police officers despite the absence of official support or legal authority demonstrated that some forms of duty were independent of institutional frameworks and bureaucratic recognition. The criminals who sought to exploit Gotham's collapse for their own benefit discovered that the absence of formal law enforcement did not mean the absence of opposition, as Gordon's improvised police force proved capable of adapting their methods and tactics to function effectively in an environment where conventional approaches were no longer viable. The battles that followed tested both sides' determination and resourcefulness, while also revealing the fundamental differences between those who sought to protect and those who sought to exploit. The children who found themselves orphaned or separated from their families during the earthquake and its aftermath represented both the most vulnerable population and the most important priority for anyone committed to preserving civilization and hope for the future. The refugee camps and makeshift shelters that provided them with basic necessities were also symbols of community resilience and mutual support that demonstrated humanity's capacity for cooperation and sacrifice in the face of overwhelming adversity. Sarah Essen's work with these children reflected both her professional training in dealing with traumatized individuals and her personal commitment to protecting those who could not protect themselves. Yet her involvement in this humanitarian effort would ultimately place her in the path of the greatest evil that Gotham had yet produced. Her dedication to caring for the innocent made her a natural target for someone whose twisted psychology found particular satisfaction in destroying those whose lives were devoted to helping others. The Joker's escape from Arkham Asylum during the chaos that followed the earthquake was perhaps inevitable given the breakdown of security systems and the diversion of resources to more immediate rescue and relief operations. Yet his freedom represented a threat that exceeded anything that Gotham's improvised defenses were prepared to handle. The psychological warfare specialist who had once tortured Gordon and his daughter was now loose in an environment where conventional restraints on his behavior had been eliminated. The attack on the children's shelter that Sarah had been working to maintain represented more than simple criminal violence, but rather a calculated assault on hope itself, an attempt to demonstrate that even the most innocent and deserving victims could not be protected by the forces of law and order that had proven inadequate against the challenges of post-earthquake Gotham. The precision and cruelty of the assault reflected the Joker's understanding that maximum psychological impact could be achieved through careful selection of targets and methods. The stand that Sarah Essen made in defense of the children under her care was both heroic and tragic, demonstrating the courage and selflessness that had made her an exceptional police officer, while also revealing the terrible vulnerability of good people when confronted by evil that recognized no boundaries or limitations. Her refusal to abandon those who depended upon her protection reflected the same moral clarity that had attracted Gordon to her years earlier. The moment when the Joker's bullet ended, Sarah Essen's life marked not only personal tragedy for Gordon, but also symbolic defeat for the forces of civilization and order that had been struggling to maintain their influence in a city that seemed to have been abandoned by conventional morality and human decency. The loss of someone who had dedicated her life to protecting others served as a reminder that heroism carried a price that could not be calculated in advance or avoided through careful planning. The scene that Gordon encountered upon arriving at the shelter tested his psychological and emotional resources in ways that exceeded even his previous experiences with trauma and loss, forcing him to confront the reality that his beloved wife had died in service to principles they both cherished, while also discovering that her killer was standing among the bodies with apparent satisfaction at his accomplishment. The restraint that Gordon showed in not immediately killing the Joker reflected years of training and moral development that had prepared him to maintain his humanity, even under the most extreme provocation. The conversation that took place between Gordon and the Joker in that room filled with death and devastation was perhaps the most psychologically complex encounter in their long history of conflict, as the grieving widower confronted the creature who had destroyed his happiness while also grappling with his own desire for revenge and his commitment to the legal principles that had governed his entire career. The gun that Gordon held represented both the power to achieve immediate satisfaction and the temptation to abandon everything he had spent his life building and defending. The choice that Gordon made to shoot the Joker in the kneecap rather than in the heart was both mercy and justice, punishment and restraint, demonstrating that even in moments of overwhelming grief and rage, he remained capable of distinguishing between legitimate law enforcement and personal vengeance. The symbolic nature of the injury, crippling the Joker as he had crippled Barbara, provided satisfaction that was both meaningful and appropriate, while also maintaining the moral distinction between hero and villain. The laughter that erupted from the Joker upon understanding the meaning of Gordon's act represented recognition and appreciation for the symmetry of the punishment, while also acknowledging that Gordon had passed a test that proved his essential humanity remained intact despite everything he had endured. The madman's approval was both tribute to Gordon's character and reminder that some forms of evil took pleasure in the very restraint and principle that should have been their condemnation. The funeral that followed Sarah Essen's death was attended by police officers from throughout the region who understood that her sacrifice represented not only personal loss for Gordon, but also symbolic defeat for all those who had dedicated their lives to protecting innocence and maintaining order in a world that seemed increasingly hostile to such efforts. The eulogies that were delivered praised both her professional accomplishments and her personal character, while also acknowledging that her death had created a void that could never be completely filled. The grief that Gordon experienced in the aftermath of Sarah's murder was both personal and professional, encompassing not only the loss of a beloved spouse, but also the recognition that his career and his commitment to justice had ultimately contributed to her death by making her a target for those who sought to hurt him through harming people he loved. The guilt that accompanied his sorrow created additional burdens that would influence his decisions and relationships for years to come. The investigation that followed the shelter attack revealed the systematic planning and careful preparation that the Joker had undertaken to maximize the psychological impact of his assault, while also ensuring that his escape routes and safety measures would allow him to survive long enough to appreciate the consequences of his actions. The evidence gathered during this investigation provided insights into the criminal mind while also demonstrating the inadequacy of conventional law enforcement methods when dealing with opponents who operated according to principles that transcended normal human psychology. The manhunt that ensued involved coordination between Gordon's improvised police force, Batman's network of allies, and federal agencies that had previously written off Gotham as beyond salvation, yet now recognized that allowing such crimes to go unpunished would set precedents that threatened stability far beyond the city's borders. The resources devoted to capturing the Joker reflected understanding that some criminals posed threats to civilization itself, rather than merely to individual victims or local communities. The eventual apprehension of the Joker was accomplished through methods that combined conventional police work with unconventional tactics, demonstrating that even the most dangerous criminals remained vulnerable to systematic investigation and coordinated action when sufficient resources and determination were applied to the task. The satisfaction that Gordon felt upon seeing his wife's killer return to custody was tempered by recognition that no punishment could restore what had been lost or prevent similar tragedies in the future. The healing process that began in the weeks and months following Sarah's death was neither rapid nor complete, requiring Gordon to rebuild his understanding of what his life and career meant in a world where the people he loved were vulnerable to attack by enemies who sought to strike at him through harming those closest to him. The support that he received from colleagues, friends, and family provided some comfort, while also reminding him that he was not alone in his grief or his commitment to continuing the fight against forces that threatened innocent life. The legacy that Sarah Essen left behind extended far beyond her immediate family and professional colleagues to encompass all those who had been touched by her dedication to protecting others and her willingness to sacrifice her own safety in service to principles that transcended personal interest. Her example continued to inspire others long after her death, proving that heroism could be measured not only by dramatic acts of courage, but also by consistent commitment to helping those who could not help themselves. The changes that Gordon underwent during his recovery from this profound loss reflected both the depth of his grief and his determination to honor Sarah's memory through continued service to the cause they had shared. Yet these changes also created distance between him and others who had not experienced similar losses and could not fully understand the weight of his sorrow or the complexity of his relationship with the dangerous work that had ultimately claimed his wife's life. In the chronicles of heroism, few chapters are as poignant as those that chronicle the quiet courage required to continue serving others. After experiencing losses so profound that they seem to drain all meaning from the very concept of justice, leaving behind only the mechanical performance of duties that once carried the weight of genuine purpose and heartfelt conviction. The years that followed Sarah Essen's murder marked a period of profound transformation for James Gordon, as he struggled to rebuild his understanding of what his life and career meant in a world where the people he loved remained perpetually vulnerable to the malevolent forces that sought to strike at him through the destruction of everything he held dear. The investigation of his own shooting, which occurred barely 18 months after Sarah's death, revealed the pathetic yet dangerous nature of the criminal who had sought revenge against the commissioner for arrests and prosecutions that had disrupted what the perpetrator considered his legitimate business activities. The would-be assassin was neither a mastermind nor a particularly skilled operative, but rather one of thousands of small-time criminals whose lives had been touched by Gordon's relentless pursuit of justice, yet whose grievances had festered into homicidal rage that demanded violent satisfaction regardless of consequences or likelihood of success. The bullet that found its mark during that routine evening walk through what should have been a safe neighborhood served as a stark reminder that even the most mundane activities carried risks for someone whose professional life had made him enemies among individuals with nothing left to lose and no remaining restraints on their willingness to inflict harm upon those they blamed for their circumstances. The injury itself was serious but not life-threatening, yet its psychological impact was far more significant than the physical damage, forcing Gordon to confront his own mortality while also acknowledging that his continued presence in law enforcement made him a permanent target for retribution. The recovery period that followed provided Gordon with the first extended opportunity in decades to reflect upon the trajectory of his career and the accumulated costs of his unwavering commitment to honest police work in a city where such dedication inevitably created powerful enemies and placed loved ones at risk. The hospital room where he spent weeks recovering from surgery and physical therapy became a place of contemplation and reassessment, where the sound of his own breathing reminded him daily of how close he had come to joining Sarah in whatever realm awaited those who had given their lives in service to principles greater than personal safety or comfort. The visitors who came to see him during his convalescence represented the full spectrum of relationships that had defined his professional and personal life, from fellow police officers who understood the risks they all faced to federal agents who had worked with him on cases involving organized crime and political corruption. The conversations that took place in that sterile environment revealed both the respect he had earned through decades of exemplary service and the genuine concern that his colleagues felt for someone whose integrity had made him a symbol of what law enforcement could accomplish when guided by unwavering moral principles. The flowers and cards that filled his room came not only from fellow officers and government officials, but also from ordinary citizens who had been touched by his work over the years, crime victims whose cases he had solved, witnesses he had protected, and community leaders who had benefited from his efforts to maintain peace and order in neighborhoods that might otherwise have been abandoned to criminal control. The gratitude expressed in these messages provided some comfort, while also reminding him that his work had made a genuine difference in the lives of people who deserved protection and justice. The decision to retire from active duty was neither sudden nor easy, representing the culmination of months of careful consideration about whether his continued presence as police commissioner served the best interests of the department, the city, and the people who depended upon effective law enforcement for their safety and security. The factors that influenced this choice included not only his physical condition and the ongoing threats to his personal safety, but also his recognition that the psychological toll of recent losses had affected his judgment and effectiveness in ways that might compromise his ability to serve others. The retirement ceremony that marked the end of his official career was both celebration and farewell, acknowledging the extraordinary achievements of someone who had transformed the Gotham City Police Department from a corrupt and ineffective organization into a legitimate force for justice, while also recognizing that his departure created a void that would be difficult, if not impossible, to fill. The speeches that were delivered in his honor praised both his professional accomplishments and his personal character, while also acknowledging the sacrifices that he and his family had made in service to the community. The pension that provided for his financial security during retirement was modest by the standards of corporate executives or successful criminals, yet it represented the accumulated value of decades of honest work and faithful service to the public interest. The apartment he rented in a quiet neighborhood far from police headquarters provided him with safety and privacy, while also offering easy access to the cultural and recreational activities that he hoped might help him discover new sources of meaning and purpose in a life no longer defined by professional obligations and official responsibilities. The adjustment to civilian life proved more difficult than Gordon had anticipated, as the routines and relationships that had structured his existence for over 20 years were suddenly absent, leaving him with unprecedented amounts of unstructured time and limited outlets for the energy and intelligence that had previously been devoted to solving complex cases and managing a large organization. The silence that filled his days was both peaceful and oppressive, offering respite from constant stress, while also creating a vacuum that seemed to emphasize the absence of the people and activities that had made his previous existence meaningful. The books that had always provided him with intellectual stimulation during brief leisure moments now became primary occupations, as he explored subjects that his professional responsibilities had never allowed him time to investigate thoroughly. The history and philosophy that had fascinated him since college took on new relevance as he attempted to understand the broader patterns and meanings within which his own experience might be situated, while biographies of other public servants provided both inspiration and cautionary tales about the challenges of transitioning from active careers to reflective retirement. The correspondence that he maintained with former colleagues and contacts throughout the law enforcement community provided him with continued connection to the work that had defined his identity, while also keeping him informed about ongoing developments in cases and investigations that he had initiated but been unable to complete before his retirement. These letters and phone calls served as lifelines to a world that remained important to him, even though he was no longer directly involved in its daily operations and immediate challenges. The consulting work that various agencies offered him reflected recognition that his knowledge and experience remained valuable resources that could benefit ongoing investigations and reform efforts. Yet Gordon approached these opportunities with careful consideration of whether such involvement would compromise his safety or create conflicts with his desire to maintain distance from the dangers and pressures that had ultimately forced his retirement. The cases that he agreed to assist with were selected based on their potential for meaningful impact rather than financial compensation or personal recognition. The relationship with Batman that had been central to Gordon's most significant professional achievements continued during his retirement, though its nature and frequency necessarily changed to accommodate his altered circumstances and reduced access to official resources and information. The visits that took place in his apartment or during carefully arranged meetings in secure locations provided opportunities for continued collaboration, while also acknowledging the limitations that his civilian status placed upon their partnership. The advice that Gordon was able to offer during these encounters drew upon decades of experience dealing with criminal organizations, corrupt officials, and the complex political dynamics that influenced law enforcement effectiveness. Yet he was careful to avoid crossing lines that might compromise either his safety or Batman's operational security. The wisdom that he shared was that of someone who had seen the full spectrum of human behavior while maintaining faith in the possibility of justice and positive change despite overwhelming evidence of corruption and evil. The knowledge that Batman continued to rely upon his insights and counsel provided Gordon with satisfaction that his retirement had not ended his contribution to the cause of justice, but had simply transformed the nature of his involvement in ways that might prove more sustainable over the long term. The recognition that his experience remained valuable to someone whose judgment and effectiveness he respected completely offered reassurance that his career had created lasting benefits that would continue to serve the public interest, even after his official role had ended. The loneliness that characterized much of Gordon's retirement was neither complete nor unrelieved, as he gradually developed new relationships and renewed old friendships that had been neglected during his years of intense professional focus. Yet the absence of Sarah and the distance from Barbara and his son created emotional voids that social activities and casual acquaintances could never completely fill. The grief that he continued to experience was not the sharp agony of fresh loss, but rather the dull ache of permanent absence. A constant background awareness that the people who had meant most to him were no longer available for the conversations and companionship that had made life's challenges bearable. The therapy that he pursued during this period was designed to help him process not only recent traumas but also the accumulated stress and moral injury that resulted from decades of exposure to human evil and institutional corruption, experiences that had shaped his worldview, while also creating psychological burdens that required professional attention and systematic treatment. The counseling sessions provided him with tools for managing depression and anxiety, while also offering perspectives on grief and healing that helped him understand his emotional responses and develop strategies for moving forward constructively. The physical fitness routine that he maintained during retirement served multiple purposes beyond simple health maintenance, providing him with structure and goals that gave meaning to his days, while also ensuring that he remained prepared for any future challenges that might require physical capability and mental alertness. The exercises that had once been necessary preparation for dangerous police work became instead methods for maintaining dignity and independence during the aging process, while also offering psychological benefits that complemented his therapeutic activities. The community involvement that gradually became part of Gordon's retirement routine included volunteer work with organizations that served crime victims, at-risk youth, and other vulnerable populations whose needs he understood from professional experience and personal conviction. The speaking engagements that various groups requested provided him with opportunities to share insights about law enforcement and criminal justice, while also contributing to public education and policy discussions that might lead to meaningful reforms. The writing project that Gordon undertook during his retirement years was initially conceived as a memoir that would document his experiences and observations for the benefit of future generations of law enforcement professionals. Yet the process of organizing his thoughts and memories gradually evolved into something more philosophical and analytical, examining the broader questions about justice, corruption, and moral courage that had emerged from his decades of service. The manuscript that slowly took shape represented both personal catharsis and public service, offering readers insights into the realities of police work, while also exploring the ethical dimensions of using official authority in service to democratic values. The cosmic crisis that eventually drew Gordon back into active involvement with world-threatening events began as distant reports of strange phenomena and unexplained disasters that seemed to have no connection to local concerns or personal interests, yet which gradually revealed themselves to be manifestations of forces that threatened the fundamental structure of reality itself. The infinite crisis that reshaped the boundaries between different versions of Earth created opportunities for both heroes and villains to influence outcomes that would determine the future of consciousness and civilization throughout the bold multiverse. The role that Gordon played during this universal emergency was necessarily limited by his civilian status and lack of superhuman abilities. Yet his experience and judgment proved valuable to heroes who needed guidance about strategic planning and tactical coordination while dealing with threats that exceeded anything they had previously encountered. The advice he offered drew upon decades of experience managing complex operations and coordinating multiple agencies while maintaining focus on primary objectives despite constantly changing circumstances. The knowledge that his insights remained relevant and useful during humanity's greatest crisis provided Gordon with renewed sense of purpose and connection to the heroic mission that had defined his career, proving that retirement from official position need not mean abandonment of the principles and commitments that had motivated his years of service. The recognition that even cosmic-level emergencies required the same fundamental skills of leadership, communication, and moral clarity that characterized effective law enforcement offered validation of the choices he had made throughout his professional life. The aftermath of the crisis created new realities that required adaptation and reassessment by everyone who had been involved in the struggle to preserve existence itself. Yet for Gordon, the most significant change was the mysterious restoration of his official position as police commissioner, a development that he discovered only when reporting to what he assumed would be a routine consultation meeting. The explanation for this transformation was neither clear nor complete, involving temporal distortions and reality alterations that defied conventional understanding, while also suggesting that cosmic forces had recognized the importance of his continued service. The department that Gordon found himself leading once again bore similarities to the organization he had left, yet careful observation revealed subtle differences that reflected the influence of the crisis and the modifications that had been made to the timeline of his world. The officers who reported to him included some familiar faces and some strangers, while the cases and challenges that demanded attention combined elements of continuity with innovations that required new approaches and fresh thinking. The return to active duty was both exhilarating and overwhelming, as Gordon rediscovered the satisfaction that came from meaningful work, while also confronting the reality that his years of retirement had left him somewhat disconnected from current methods and technologies that had evolved during his absence. The learning curve that he needed to navigate was steep but not insurmountable, drawing upon the intellectual flexibility and adaptive capability that had served him throughout his career, while also requiring him to acknowledge limitations that age and experience had created. The new 52 continuity revision that accompanied his return to service brought with it alterations to his personal history and character background that required careful navigation and interpretation, as writers and editors sought to preserve essential elements of his identity while also updating his story for contemporary audiences and storytelling needs. The changes that were implemented included modifications to his military background, family relationships, and professional development while maintaining the core characteristics that had made him a compelling and admirable figure. The younger appearance and enhanced physical capabilities that characterized his revised incarnation reflected both the practical needs of ongoing storytelling and the symbolic importance of presenting him as someone capable of meeting future challenges rather than simply managing the legacy of past achievements. The restoration of his traditional red hair and mustache provided visual continuity with earlier versions, while also acknowledging that some aspects of character design possessed iconic significance that transcended realistic considerations about aging and physical change. The Marine Corps background that was emphasized in his updated origin story provided explanation for his tactical skills and leadership abilities, while also connecting him to traditions of military service and sacrifice that resonated with contemporary audiences who had lived through decades of overseas conflicts and homeland security concerns. The combat experience and specialized training that this military service implied offered justification for his effectiveness in dangerous situations, while also suggesting sources of psychological resilience that had enabled him to survive and thrive despite exposure to extreme trauma and ongoing stress. The family dynamics that were established in the revised continuity preserved the essential relationships while streamlining some of the complications that had accumulated through decades of editorial changes and continuity revisions, creating a framework that could support future storytelling, while also honoring the emotional investments that readers had made in these characters over the years. The marriage to Barbara Kean and parentage of Barbara Gordon were restored to their original biological basis, while the history with Sarah Essen was preserved as an important chapter in his emotional development. The departmental relationships that characterized Gordon's return to service reflected both continuity with established patterns and innovation in response to changing social and technological circumstances that required new approaches to law enforcement and community relations. The corruption that had previously plagued the GCPD remained a significant challenge, yet the specific individuals and organizations involved had been altered to reflect contemporary criminal activities and political realities, while maintaining the essential dynamic of honest officers struggling against institutional decay. The partnership with Batman that resumed upon Gordon's return to active duty built upon the foundation of trust and mutual respect that had been established during their earlier collaboration, while also acknowledging that both individuals had evolved during their separation and that their relationship would need to adapt to changed circumstances and new challenges. The communication protocols and operational agreements that governed their cooperation were updated to reflect lessons learned from previous successes and failures, while also incorporating new technologies and methodologies that enhanced their effectiveness. The cases that defined Gordon's renewed tenure as police commissioner included both familiar types of criminal activity that had characterized his earlier career and new forms of threat that reflected technological advancement and social change, requiring him to apply established principles of investigation and law enforcement to novel situations while also developing innovative responses to unprecedented challenges. The balance between continuity and innovation that characterized his approach demonstrated that experience and adaptability were complementary rather than contradictory qualities. The public recognition that Gordon received for his return to service reflected both appreciation for his past achievements and confidence in his ability to address future challenges, proving that his reputation for integrity and effectiveness had survived his years of retirement, while also growing stronger through reflection and validation. The media coverage and community support that accompanied his restoration provided encouragement, while also creating expectations and pressures that required careful management to avoid compromising his operational effectiveness. The personal satisfaction that Gordon derived from his return to meaningful work was tempered by awareness that the dangers and stresses that had originally forced his retirement remained present and potentially more threatening than before, requiring constant vigilance and careful risk management to protect both himself and the people who depended upon his leadership and judgment. The knowledge that his service remained necessary and valued provided motivation to continue despite personal costs, while also creating obligations that extended far beyond individual preference or convenience. The legacy of Gordon's retirement and return established patterns and precedents that would influence future decisions about career transitions and public service, demonstrating that dedication to justice and protection of innocence could take many forms, while also proving that age and experience enhanced rather than diminished the value of individuals whose commitment to principle had been tested and validated through decades of faithful service. The story of his journey from active duty through civilian life and back to official responsibility offered inspiration to others facing similar transitions, while also illustrating the complex relationship between personal fulfillment and public obligation in the lives of those called to serve others. In the annals of heroism, there exist chapters so dark and twisted that they seem to emerge from the fevered nightmares of madmen, rather than the calculated schemes of rational criminals. Periods when the very foundations of order and justice are subjected to assaults so systematic and malevolent that they threaten not merely individual lives, but the entire philosophical framework upon which civilization rests. The events that would come to be known as Batman Eternal and Batman Endgame represented two such chapters in James Gordon's long career, interconnected crises that would test every principle he had developed through decades of service, while also revealing new depths of corruption and evil that exceeded even his considerable experience with the darker aspects of human nature. The morning that began Gordon's descent into the labyrinthine conspiracy of Batman Eternal started like countless others throughout his renewed tenure as police commissioner, with routine briefings about overnight incidents, staff meetings concerning ongoing investigations, and administrative decisions about resource allocation and personnel deployment. The normalcy of these activities provided no warning of the catastrophic events that would unfold before sunset, transforming what should have been an ordinary day into the beginning of a nightmare that would consume months of his life and threaten everything he had spent years building and protecting. The call that summoned Gordon to the Beacon Tower subway station came through standard emergency channels, reporting suspicious activity that required immediate police response and possible GCPD coordination with other city agencies. The initial description suggested nothing more serious than a routine disturbance or minor criminal incident, the kind of situation that patrol officers handle dozens of times each week without requiring supervisory involvement or special tactical considerations. The decision to respond personally reflected Gordon's hands-on management style rather than any recognition that he was walking into a trap that had been months in the making. The underground platform where Gordon found himself confronting what appeared to be an armed suspect was a location he had visited numerous times throughout his career, a familiar environment where he understood the tactical considerations and safety protocols necessary to minimize risk to civilians and law enforcement personnel. The layout of the station provided adequate cover and multiple exit routes, while the lighting and acoustics seemed normal for such facilities, offering no indication that sophisticated surveillance and manipulation equipment had been installed to ensure that his response would be recorded and transmitted according to predetermined plans. The figure that Gordon encountered in the station's depths appeared to be a typical criminal suspect, someone whose behavior and appearance suggested mental instability or substance abuse, rather than participation in elaborate conspiracy or advanced planning. The weapon that the individual displayed was clearly visible and apparently loaded, creating an immediate threat that demanded response according to established police procedures and Gordon's training in crisis intervention and tactical deployment. The positioning and movements of the suspect suggested either genuine psychological disturbance or skilled acting, designed to create specific impressions and provoke particular responses. The moment when Gordon drew his service weapon and prepared to issue commands for the suspect's surrender was captured by multiple hidden cameras that had been strategically positioned to record every detail of the confrontation from Boyne, angles that would support predetermined narratives about police misconduct and excessive force. The technology that enabled this comprehensive surveillance was far more sophisticated than anything available to conventional criminal organizations, suggesting involvement by agencies or individuals with access to military-grade equipment and professional expertise in psychological operations and media manipulation. The shot that Gordon fired at what appeared to be an armed and dangerous suspect was justified according to every protocol and regulation that governed police use of deadly force, yet the carefully constructed circumstances surrounding the incident ensured that his actions would be misinterpreted and misrepresented in ways designed to destroy his reputation and effectiveness as a law enforcement leader. The bullet that struck its target revealed not a weapon, but an elaborate prop, while the suspect proved to be an innocent civilian who had been coerced or manipulated into participating in this deadly charade through methods that remained unclear. The explosion that followed immediately after the shooting was caused by charges that had been placed throughout the subway tunnel system, devices whose detonation was triggered either by remote control or by sensors that detected Gordon's gunfire, ensuring that the incident would escalate from apparent police misconduct into a major disaster with multiple casualties and extensive property damage. The blast that derailed the approaching train was timed with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of the transportation system's schedules and safety protocols, while the resulting destruction created chaos that prevented immediate investigation of the crime scene. The investigation that followed Gordon's arrest and charging with multiple felonies was hampered from the beginning by evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and official interference that prevented honest examination of what had actually occurred in the subway station. The video footage that was released to media outlets had been edited to remove crucial context and create impressions of deliberate misconduct, while physical evidence that might have supported Gordon's version of events mysteriously disappeared from police custody or was ruled inadmissible on technical grounds that seemed designed to prevent its consideration by judges and juries. The legal proceedings that followed Gordon's indictment revealed the extent of the conspiracy that had been organized against him, involving corrupt officials throughout the city government and criminal justice system who had been waiting for an opportunity to eliminate someone whose integrity and effectiveness posed threats to their profitable arrangements with organized crime and political corruption. The prosecutors who handled the case demonstrated more interest in securing conviction than in determining truth, while defense attorneys found themselves blocked at every turn by rulings and procedures that seemed designed to prevent adequate representation. The media coverage that surrounded the Gordon case was characterized by sensationalism and bias that reflected either genuine incompetence or deliberate manipulation by individuals with access to major news organizations and editorial, decision-making processes. The stories that appeared in newspapers and television broadcasts consistently presented the most damaging possible interpretation of events, while ignoring evidence and testimony that might have provided different perspectives or raised questions about the official narrative that was being promoted by prosecutors and political leaders. The public response to Gordon's apparent fall from grace revealed both the fragility of reputation and the speed with which popular opinion could be manipulated through coordinated media campaigns and political messaging that exploited existing tensions and prejudices about police conduct and official accountability. The demonstrations and protests that erupted throughout Gotham City were genuine expressions of community concern and anger, yet they were also carefully orchestrated events that served the purposes of those who had engineered Gordon's downfall through creating pressure for his conviction and punishment. The prison cell where Gordon found himself confined during his trial was both punishment and protection, isolating him from the general population, while also preventing him from conducting his own investigation into the conspiracy that had destroyed his career and reputation. The conditions of his detention were designed to break his spirit and force him to accept plea bargains that would have required admitting guilt for crimes he had not committed, while also preventing him from exposing the truth about what had actually occurred in the subway station. The allies who remained loyal to Gordon during this crisis were few in number but significant in their courage and determination, including police officers who risked their own careers by expressing doubt about the official version of events, and civilians who had worked with him over the years and refused to believe that someone of his character could have committed the crimes attributed to him. The support that these individuals provided was both practical and psychological, offering resources for his defense, while also maintaining his faith in the possibility that truth would eventually prevail over deception and manipulation. The Batman who visited Gordon in prison was a figure transformed by the same forces that had engineered the Commissioner's downfall, someone whose own identity and mission had been compromised by enemies, who understood that the partnership between these two heroes represented the greatest threat to criminal organizations and corrupt institutions throughout Gotham City. The conversation that took place during this clandestine meeting revealed that the assault on Gordon was part of a larger campaign designed to eliminate or neutralize all effective opposition to a comprehensive takeover of the city's governmental and economic systems. The investigation that Batman conducted into the subway incident utilized methods and resources unavailable to conventional law enforcement, revealing evidence of sophisticated planning and coordination that involved participants from multiple criminal organizations and corrupt agencies working together toward common goals of eliminating honest officials and replacing them with individuals who would cooperate with illegal activities and power structures. The intelligence that emerged from this parallel investigation provided crucial insights into the scope and sophistication of the conspiracy, while also identifying specific individuals and organizations responsible for Gordon's frame-up. The escape from prison that eventually freed Gordon to participate in efforts to expose the truth about his case was accomplished through carefully coordinated efforts by his allies within and outside the criminal justice system, including police officers who had maintained their faith in his innocence, and civilian supporters who possessed resources and capabilities that proved crucial in overcoming the security measures designed to prevent his release. The operation that liberated him was both rescue mission and symbolic statement about the power of loyalty and principle to triumph over corruption and deception. The evidence that Gordon and his allies gathered during their investigation revealed connections between the subway incident and a vast network of criminal and corrupt activities that encompassed not only local politicians and police officials but also federal agencies, international criminal organizations, and corporate entities whose legitimate business activities provided cover for money laundering and other illegal operations. The scope of this conspiracy was so extensive that exposing it would require resources and coordination that exceeded what any individual or small group could accomplish independently. The revelation that the subway bombing had been orchestrated by enemies who possessed detailed knowledge of Gordon's personality, methods, and moral principles demonstrated the personal nature of the assault, while also proving that his reputation for integrity and effectiveness had made him a primary target for elimination by forces that could not tolerate the existence of honest law enforcement in positions of authority and influence. The psychological profile that had been developed of Gordon by his enemies revealed both the extent of their surveillance and their understanding of how to exploit his commitment to duty and protection of innocent life. The final confrontation that resolved the Batman Eternal Crisis required Gordon to risk everything he had spent months trying to preserve and recover, including his freedom, his reputation, and his life, in service to principles that transcended personal concerns about career and comfort, while also proving that some forms of evil could only be defeated through coordinated action by individuals willing to sacrifice their own interests for the greater good of their community and society. The vindication that followed the exposure of the conspiracy provided Gordon with restoration of his position and reputation, while also revealing the extent of the forces that had been arrayed against him and the sophistication of the Fend campaign that had been designed to destroy his effectiveness as a law enforcement leader. The public apology and recognition that he received from official sources was accompanied by private acknowledgements from colleagues and citizens who understood that his ordeal had been part of a larger struggle between the forces of corruption and the advocates of honest government and equal justice under law. The transition from the Batman Eternal Crisis to the events of Batman Endgame occurred with barely sufficient time for recovery and preparation, as Gordon found himself facing new challenges that exceeded even the sophisticated conspiracy that had nearly destroyed his career and reputation. The emergence of the Joker from whatever realm of madness had contained him was accompanied by evidence of planning and resource gathering that suggested his latest scheme would surpass all previous efforts in scope, sophistication, and potential for causing massive casualties and social disruption. The investigation that Gordon launched into reports of the Joker's activities revealed patterns of behavior and preparation that differed significantly from the criminal's previous campaigns, incorporating elements of biological warfare, mass psychology, and urban terrorism that suggested either evolution in his capabilities or assistance from allies with specialized knowledge and advanced resources. The evidence that accumulated during the early stages of this investigation indicated that Gotham City was facing a threat that might exceed the capacity of conventional law enforcement and emergency response systems to contain or neutralize. The partnership that Gordon formed with Batman during the Endgame crisis was complicated by obvious changes in the Dark Knight's behavior and methods that suggested he was struggling with challenges or influences that affected his precise judgment and effectiveness in ways that created additional dangers for everyone involved in efforts to stop the Joker's latest scheme. The conversations that took place between them during joint operations revealed that Batman was fighting battles on multiple fronts simultaneously, dealing with external threats while also confronting internal conflicts that made him less predictable and potentially more dangerous than usual. The Joker virus that had infected significant portions of Gotham's population represented a form of biological terrorism that transcended conventional criminal activity to encompass acts of war against civilization itself, transforming innocent citizens into extensions of the Joker's twisted consciousness, while also creating conditions where normal social and governmental functions became impossible to maintain. The spread of this infection created emergencies that required military-level response, while also raising questions about whether quarantine and containment measures could be implemented without destroying the very freedoms and rights that such measures were supposedly designed to protect. The symptoms that the virus produced in its victims included not only physical transformation but also psychological changes that reflected the Joker's own mental pathology, creating armies of individuals who shared his chaotic worldview and his commitment to destroying order, meaning, and hope wherever they encountered these concepts. The treatment protocols that medical personnel attempted to develop were hampered by the virus's apparent ability to adapt and evolve in response to therapeutic interventions, while also seeming to operate according to principles that defied conventional understanding of biological and psychological processes. The tactical situation that emerged as the infection spread throughout the city required Gordon to coordinate responses that combined public health measures with law enforcement and military operations, while also maintaining communication and cooperation with Batman. Despite growing concerns about his mental state and the reliability of his judgment in crisis situations, the command center that Gordon established became the focal point for organizing resistance to the Joker's assault, while also serving as a refuge for uninfected citizens and a coordination point for evacuation and treatment efforts. The resources that were required to combat the Joker virus exceeded anything available through normal governmental channels, necessitating cooperation with federal agencies, military units, and international organizations that possessed specialized capabilities and equipment designed for responding to biological warfare and mass casualty events. The logistics of coordinating such diverse resources, while maintaining operational security and preventing the infection from spreading beyond Gotham's borders, created challenges that tested Gordon's administrative and leadership skills to their absolute limits. The moment when Gordon found himself face to face with the Joker, in the midst of the chaos that had consumed the city, represented both the culmination of decades of conflict between them and a test of principles that had been developed through years of exposure to various forms of evil and corruption. The conversation that took place during this encounter revealed the philosophical dimensions of their antagonistic relationship, while also providing insights into the Joker's motivations and methods that had never been available through previous confrontations. The decision to shoot the Joker was made not from hatred or desire for revenge, but from calculated assessment of the threat that his continued existence posed to innocent life and social order, reflecting Gordon's understanding that some forms of evil were so fundamental and irredeemable that they could only be addressed through the application of lethal force, despite the moral and psychological costs that such actions imposed upon those who carried them out. The satisfaction that Gordon felt upon believing he had finally eliminated this source of chaos and suffering was tempered by awareness that even justified killing carried spiritual and emotional consequences that would require processing and integration. The Joker's apparent death provided only temporary relief from the immediate crisis. As the virus continued to spread and the infected population continued to wreak havoc throughout the city, despite the elimination of their supposed leader and inspiration. The realization that the Joker's influence had become independent of his physical presence suggested that his assault on civilization had achieved a level of success that would persist, even if he could never again directly threaten innocent life or social stability. The resurrection of the Joker from what should have been certain death was accomplished through means that defied medical and scientific understanding, while also demonstrating that some forms of evil possessed resources and capabilities that transcended normal limitations of mortality and physical existence. The return of someone who should have been permanently eliminated created new forms of terror and despair, while also proving that conventional responses to such threats were fundamentally inadequate for achieving lasting resolution. The axe that the Joker buried in Gordon's chest during their final confrontation was both weapon and symbol, representing the physical assault on his body and the psychological attack on his spirit that had characterized their entire relationship, while also serving as a reminder that evil often extracted a price from those who opposed it, regardless of the righteousness of their cause or the validity of their methods. The injury that resulted from this attack was severe enough to threaten his life, while also ensuring that he would carry permanent reminders of this encounter for whatever time remained to him. The infection that entered Gordon's system through the Joker's weapon represented more than simple biological contamination, but rather a spiritual and psychological assault designed to transform him into something that reflected the Joker's own twisted nature and worldview. The virus that coursed through his bloodstream carried with it not only physical symptoms, but also mental influences that threatened to corrupt his moral clarity and transform him into another agent of chaos and destruction rather than the force for order and justice he had always strived to be. The medical treatment that Gordon received following this assault was complicated by the unique properties of the Joker virus and its apparent ability to resist conventional therapeutic interventions, while also adapting to neutralize attempts at elimination or control. The doctors and scientists who worked to save his life were forced to develop experimental protocols and untested procedures that carried their own risks, while offering uncertain prospects for success or complete recovery. The recovery process that followed was both physical and spiritual, requiring Gordon to heal not only from his injuries, but also from the psychological trauma of believing he had been transformed into something evil and destructive, despite his lifelong commitment to protecting innocent life and preserving social order. The therapy and counseling that accompanied his medical treatment helped him process the complex emotions and moral questions that arose from his encounter with the Joker, while also providing him with tools for maintaining his sanity and sense of purpose. The resolution of the endgame crisis came through Batman's ultimate sacrifice in what appeared to be a mutual destruction that eliminated both the Dark Knight and his greatest enemy, while also ending the viral infection that had been it, threatened to consume not only Gotham City, but potentially the entire world. The cost of this victory was almost too high to bear, as Gordon found himself robbed not only of his greatest professional ally, but also of someone who had become a trusted friend, whose judgment and dedication he had learned to rely upon completely. The aftermath of these interconnected crises left Gordon fundamentally changed in ways that went beyond physical scars or professional advancement to encompass deeper alterations in his understanding of evil, justice, and the price that must sometimes be paid by those who choose to stand against forces that threaten everything decent and civilized in human existence. The knowledge that he had survived challenges that had claimed other heroes provided both satisfaction and survivor guilt, while also creating obligations to honor their memory through continued service to the principles they had died defending. The responsibility that Gordon assumed in the wake of Batman's apparent death included not only his continued duties as police commissioner, but also the broader obligation to somehow fill the void that had been left by the elimination of someone whose presence and activities had been crucial to maintaining hope and order in a city that seemed perpetually threatened by forces of chaos and corruption. The weight of this responsibility was enormous, yet also inspiring, providing him with renewed sense of purpose, while also connecting him to traditions of heroism and sacrifice that transcended individual mortality and personal concerns. In the chronicles of heroism, few transformations are as profound or as symbolically resonant as those moments when the mantle of protection passes from one guardian to another, when circumstances demand that ordinary individuals step forward to assume responsibilities that seem to exceed human capability, while also discovering within themselves reserves of courage and determination that they never knew existed. The period that would come to be known as Super Heavy marked such a transformation in James Gordon's life, as he found himself called upon not merely to investigate crimes or coordinate law enforcement activities, but to literally become the symbol of hope and protection that Gotham City had lost when Batman made his ultimate sacrifice in the battle against the Joker's final assault upon civilization itself. The morning when Gordon first learned of Bruce Wayne's survival came not through official channels or dramatic revelation, but through the kind of routine background check that his position as police commissioner required him to conduct on citizens who had been reported missing during the chaos of the Endgame crisis. The name that appeared on his desk as part of a routine welfare inquiry seemed innocuous enough, yet something about the circumstances surrounding this particular case created an intuition that demanded further investigation despite the press of more obviously urgent matters that competed for his attention. The individual whom Gordon encountered during his discreet inquiry into Bruce Wayne's whereabouts bore little resemblance to the billionaire philanthropist whose public persona had been familiar to every citizen of Gotham for decades, yet whose private activities and personal relationships had remained mysteriously opaque despite constant media attention and social scrutiny. The man who answered the door of a modest apartment in one of the city's working-class neighborhoods appeared to be someone whose life had been fundamentally altered by trauma or illness, displaying none of the confidence, sophistication, or commanding presence that had characterized Wayne's public appearances. The conversation that followed revealed the extent of Wayne's memory loss and the complete absence of any recollection regarding his previous life, his business empire, his social responsibilities, or most significantly for Gordon's purposes, his nocturnal activities as the Dark Knight, whose partnership had been central to both men's understanding of justice and their respective roles in protecting innocent life. The amnesia that had claimed Wayne's past was so complete and apparently permanent that he seemed genuinely puzzled by questions about his identity and background, responding with the confused innocence of someone encountering these topics for the first time. The moral complexity that Gordon faced upon discovering Wayne's condition was unlike anything he had encountered during his long career in law enforcement, combining personal loyalty and professional obligation with broader questions about the nature of identity, responsibility, and the right to determine one's own destiny. The knowledge that Bruce Wayne had been Batman carried with it implications and obligations that extended far beyond simple friendship or professional courtesy to encompass the welfare of an entire city and the countless lives that might be saved or lost depending upon whether the Dark Knight could somehow be restored to his former capabilities. The temptation to reveal Wayne's true identity and attempt to restore his memories was balanced against recognition that the man who stood before him appeared to be genuinely happy, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, freed from the burden of guilt, rage, and obsessive dedication that had driven his crusade against crime, while also preventing him from experiencing normal human relationships and simple contentment. The decision about whether to preserve Wayne's peaceful ignorance or attempt to awaken the vigilante who lay dormant within his transformed consciousness represented a choice between individual welfare and collective need that had no clear moral resolution. The interim period during which Gordon wrestled with this dilemma was marked by increasing pressure from multiple sources to address the growing crime rate and social instability that had emerged in Batman's absence, as criminal organizations that had been suppressed or contained during the Dark Knight's active years began to reassert themselves with renewed boldness and ambition. The police department's resources, while considerable, were inadequate to fill the void that Batman's elimination had created, particularly given the psychological impact that his presence had exerted over Gotham's criminal population through decades of systematic intimidation and effective intervention. The corporate executives and political leaders who approached Gordon with their proposal for a mechanized Batman program initially presented their initiative as a temporary measure, designed to maintain public safety and social order until conventional law enforcement could be expanded and improved sufficiently to handle the challenges that faced the city. The technology that they described was impressive in its sophistication and theoretical capabilities, incorporating advanced materials, artificial intelligence systems, and weapons platforms that could potentially match or exceed the effectiveness that the original Batman had achieved through purely human abilities and determination. The selection process that identified Gordon as the ideal candidate for operating this technological marvel was based on multiple factors that extended beyond his obvious qualifications as a law enforcement professional to encompass psychological evaluations, physical assessments, and compatibility testing with the complex systems that would be required to function as a mechanized crime fighter. The analysis that supported their choice emphasized not only his tactical experience and moral integrity, but also his unique understanding of Batman's methods and the symbolic significance of the role that he would be assuming. The initial resistance that Gordon expressed to their proposal reflected both personal humility and practical concerns about the wisdom of replacing a genuine hero with an artificial substitute that might lack the essential qualities that had made the original Batman effective, while also creating new vulnerabilities and complications that could compromise public safety rather than enhancing it. The objections that he raised included questions about accountability, operational control, and the potential for technological failure or misuse that could transform a protective system into a threat to the very people it was designed to serve. The arguments that eventually convinced Gordon to accept this unprecedented responsibility were rooted not in appeals to his ego or ambition, but in stark recognition that Gotham City faced threats that exceeded the capacity of conventional law enforcement to address effectively, while the absence of any other viable alternative meant that rejecting their proposal would effectively abandon innocent citizens to the mercies of criminal organizations that had already demonstrated their willingness to exploit any weakness or gap in the city's defensive capabilities. The training regimen that prepared Gordon for his new role was unlike anything he had experienced during his military service or police career, requiring him to master systems and techniques that pushed the boundaries of human capability, while also learning to interface effectively with artificial intelligence programs that could enhance his natural abilities in ways that seemed almost miraculous. The physical conditioning that accompanied this technical education was designed to maximize his effectiveness within the mechanized suit, while also ensuring that he could survive the stresses and demands that combat operations would place upon his aging body. The suit itself was a masterpiece of engineering that incorporated technologies borrowed from military research, space exploration, and advanced manufacturing to create a platform that could theoretically match the capabilities that Batman had achieved through decades of training, experience, and natural talent. The armor plating provided protection against small arms, fire, and explosive devices, while the integrated weapon systems offered both lethal and non-lethal options for dealing with various categories of threat. Yet the most impressive aspect of the design was its artificial intelligence component that could process tactical information and provide strategic guidance in real time. The psychological preparation that accompanied Gordon's technical training was designed to help him adapt to the unique challenges of assuming an identity that had been shaped by someone else's experiences and motivations, while also maintaining his own moral compass and decision-making independence. The counselors who worked with him during this period emphasized the importance of understanding that he was not attempting to become Bruce Wayne or replicate Batman's exact methods, but rather creating a new interpretation of the role that reflected his own background and capabilities. The first mission that tested Gordon's effectiveness as the mechanized Batman was carefully selected to provide him with manageable challenges that would allow him to develop confidence and competence without exposing him to situations that might overwhelm his still developing skills or reveal weaknesses in the technological systems upon which his success depended. The criminals that he encountered during this initial deployment were neither sophisticated nor particularly dangerous, yet their capture and prosecution demonstrated that the concept of a mechanized Dark Knight was viable despite obvious differences from the original. The public response to the appearance of this new Batman was complex and varied, ranging from enthusiastic support for any measure that might restore safety and order to skeptical criticism of what appeared to be a corporate-sponsored replacement for a genuine hero whose sacrifice had earned him the right to rest on peace. The media coverage that accompanied Gordon's early activities was generally positive, yet also reflected underlying concerns about the wisdom of privatizing heroic responsibilities and the potential consequences of allowing business interests to control such powerful technological capabilities. The criminal organizations that had begun expanding their operations during Batman's absence responded to the emergence of his mechanized successor with tactics that reflected both respect for the symbolic power of the Batman identity and recognition that this new version might possess different strengths and weaknesses that could be exploited through careful planning and systematic probing. The tests that they conducted of Gordon's capabilities and response patterns provided them with intelligence that would inform future strategies while also revealing aspects of the mechanized suit's performance that required adjustment and improvement. The emergence of Mr. Bloom as Gotham's newest and most dangerous threat represented a challenge that exceeded anything Gordon had faced during his transition to the Batman role, combining elements of terrorism, biological warfare, and social manipulation that targeted the city's most vulnerable populations, while also seeking to undermine confidence in both governmental institutions and heroic intervention. The flowers that served as Bloom's calling card were not merely decorative elements, but rather sophisticated biological weapons that could transform ordinary citizens into extensions of his will, while also spreading chaos and fear throughout the community. The investigation that Gordon launched into Bloom's activities revealed connections between the new villain and various social problems that had been festering in Gotham's poorest neighborhoods for years, including inadequate city services, police neglect, and economic abandonment that had created conditions where desperate people might be attracted to radical solutions regardless of their ultimate consequences. The pattern of Bloom's attacks suggested that he understood how to exploit these underlying tensions while also demonstrating sophisticated knowledge of urban infrastructure and emergency response protocols. The philosophy that drove Bloom's campaign against established order was more coherent and compelling than the simple chaos that characterized most criminal activities, presenting itself as a form of revolutionary activism designed to empower the powerless while also punishing those who had benefited from systemic inequities and social injustices. The arguments that he made through various media appearances and public statements contained enough truth about real problems to attract genuine support from citizens who felt abandoned by conventional political processes and traditional law enforcement approaches. The technological capabilities that Bloom displayed during his confrontations with Gordon exceeded anything that typical criminal organizations could develop or deploy independently, suggesting either access to advanced research facilities or cooperation with individuals whose expertise in biotechnology and weapons development rivaled that of military contractors and government laboratories. The seeds that he used to transform volunteers into enhanced beings operated according to principles that challenged conventional understanding of human biology while also creating ethical dilemmas about consent, autonomy, and the right to pursue dangerous forms of self-improvement. The volunteers who accepted Bloom's enhancements were not uniformly criminals or sociopaths, but rather included individuals whose desperation or idealism had led them to embrace radical solutions to problems that conventional society had failed to address effectively, creating situations where Gordon found himself fighting against people whose motivations he could understand, even while opposing their methods and objectives. The tragedy of these encounters lay not only in the violence that they required, but also in the recognition that some of those who had chosen to follow Bloom might have become allies under different circumstances. The tactical challenges that Bloom's enhanced followers presented exceeded the capabilities that Gordon had developed during his initial training, forcing him to adapt his methods and learn new techniques, while also pushing the mechanized suit systems to their operational limits and beyond. The artificial intelligence that was supposed to provide strategic guidance proved inadequate for dealing with opponents whose abilities and behaviors defied conventional tactical analysis, requiring Gordon to rely more heavily upon his own experience and intuition than the technological advantages that had been promised. The personal cost that Gordon paid for his service as Batman extended beyond the physical dangers and tactical challenges to encompass psychological burdens that were unique to someone who was attempting to fulfill a role that had been created by someone else's genius and sacrifice. The constant comparison between his performance and the legendary achievements of his predecessor created pressure that was compounded by his awareness that he was operating sophisticated equipment rather than relying upon natural abilities that had been developed through years of training and experience. The family relationships that were affected by Gordon's assumption of the Batman identity included not only his connection with Barbara, but also his interactions with colleagues and friends who struggled to understand and accept his transformation from respected police commissioner to mechanized vigilante operating outside normal legal and administrative frameworks. The secrecy that was required to protect his dual identity created barriers that prevented normal communication and support, while also isolating him from the personal relationships that had previously provided him with strength and bland perspective. The corporate oversight that governed Gordon's activities as the mechanized Batman created tensions between his law enforcement instincts and the business priorities of those who had funded and developed the technology that made his heroic activities possible, leading to conflicts about tactics, targets, and acceptable levels of risk that reflected fundamental differences between profit-driven decision-making and public service-oriented approaches to crime fighting. The compromises that were required to maintain this partnership sometimes conflicted with Gordon's understanding of justice and appropriate police procedure. The investigation that eventually revealed Bloom's true identity and motivations required Gordon to operate independently of both his corporate sponsors and his police department colleagues, utilizing resources and methods that placed him in violation of various agreements and protocols, while also exposing him to legal and professional consequences that could end his career in law enforcement. The evidence that he gathered through these unauthorized activities provided crucial insights into Bloom's plans and capabilities, while also demonstrating the limitations of working within systems that prioritized procedural compliance over effective response to genuine threats. The discovery of Bruce Wayne's true condition and his gradual recovery of selected memories created new moral dilemmas for Gordon, as he was forced to balance his desire to restore Gotham's original protector against his respect for Wayne's apparent preference for his current peaceful existence and his concern that premature revelation might cause psychological damage that could prevent complete recovery. The conversations that took place between them during this delicate period required careful navigation of topics that could trigger memory restoration while also avoiding trauma or confusion that might compromise Wayne's healing process. The decision to reveal Batman's true identity to Wayne was made not from selfish desire to escape his own responsibilities, but from recognition that Gotham faced threats that exceeded his own capabilities and resources, while also acknowledging that the city deserved the protection of someone whose dedication and effectiveness had been proven through years of service and sacrifice. The method that Gordon chose for triggering Wayne's memory recovery reflected both his understanding of psychological principles and his hope that the restoration process could be accomplished without causing unnecessary pain or trauma. The transition that returned Bruce Wayne to his role as Batman was neither immediate nor complete, requiring a period of readjustment and retraining that acknowledged both the physical effects of his absence and the psychological challenges of resuming responsibilities that had previously consumed his entire existence. The cooperation between Gordon and Wayne during this transition period demonstrated the respect and friendship that had developed between them, while also ensuring that Gotham's protection remained effective during the changeover period. The retirement of the mechanized Batman represented both relief and loss for Gordon, who had discovered unexpected satisfaction in operating as a crime fighter, while also recognizing that his temporary assumption of the role had been motivated by necessity rather than personal ambition or desire for adventure. The return to his duties as police commissioner provided him with familiar responsibilities and comfortable routines, while also allowing him to support Batman's renewed activities through official channels and established protocols. The evaluation of Gordon's performance as the mechanized Batman revealed both successes and limitations that provided valuable insights for future technological development, while also demonstrating that heroism could not be replicated through artificial means alone, but required the kind of moral development and personal commitment that could only emerge from individual choice and character formation. The respect that he had earned from both colleagues and citizens during his temporary service as Batman enhanced his effectiveness as police commissioner, while also providing him with unique perspectives on crime fighting that would inform his future decisions and policies. The legacy of Gordon's time as Batman extended beyond his individual achievements to encompass broader questions about the relationship between technology and heroism, the possibilities and limitations of mechanized law enforcement, and the importance of maintaining human judgment and moral consideration in roles that carried enormous responsibility for public safety and social justice. The experience had tested his capabilities while also revealing aspects of his character that might never have emerged under normal circumstances, providing him with personal growth and professional development that would serve him throughout the remainder of his career. The relationships that Gordon had formed with other heroes and law enforcement professionals during his service as Batman created networks of cooperation and mutual support that would prove valuable in future crises, while also establishing his reputation as someone whose judgment and capabilities could be trusted even in the most challenging circumstances. The knowledge that he had successfully operated at the highest levels of heroic activity provided him with confidence and credibility that enhanced his effectiveness in his regular duties, while also ensuring that his voice would be heard and respected in discussions about public safety and criminal justice policy. The return to civilian identity after his brief career as a mechanized hero required Gordon to readjust his understanding of his own capabilities and limitations, while also processing the psychological effects of having operated with enhanced abilities and technological advantages that were no longer available to him in his regular duties. The transition was neither difficult nor traumatic, yet it required acknowledgement that some experiences could not be replicated and some achievements could not be repeated under normal circumstances. The knowledge that Bruce Wayne had chosen to resume his role as Batman provided Gordon with satisfaction that went beyond simple relief at being freed from dangerous responsibilities to encompass genuine happiness that Gotham's greatest protector had returned to fulfill his destiny, while also demonstrating that some forms of calling could not be permanently abandoned or transferred to others regardless of their qualifications or dedication. The partnership that resumed between them was strengthened rather than weakened by Gordon's temporary assumption of Batman's role, creating deeper understanding and mutual respect that would inform their future cooperation. The impact that Gordon's service as Batman had upon his daughter Barbara was profound and complex, combining pride in his achievements with concern for his safety, while also providing her with new perspectives on the burdens and responsibilities that came with assuming heroic identities and operating outside normal legal and social frameworks. The conversations that took place between them during and after this experience revealed aspects of both their characters, while also strengthening their relationship through shared understanding of the challenges that came with choosing to serve others regardless of personal cost. The historical significance of Gordon's brief career as Batman lay not in any specific victories or achievements, but rather in its demonstration that heroism could emerge from unexpected sources and take forms that transcended traditional categories and definitions, proving that the spirit of service and protection could inspire ordinary individuals to attempt extraordinary things when circumstances demanded such responses. The precedent that he established would influence future discussions about emergency leadership and crisis response, while also providing inspiration for others who might be called upon to assume responsibilities that seem to exceed their assumed capabilities or training. In the vast chronicle of heroism that spans from the first moment a young policeman encountered a figure dressed as a bat in the shadows of a corrupt city, to the final image of an aging commissioner, watching that same symbol cast its eternal glow across Gotham's skyline, we find reflected not merely the story of one man's dedication to justice, but the deeper truth that some forms of service transcend individual mortality to become part of the very foundation upon which civilization rests. James Gordon's journey through decades of triumph and tragedy, corruption and redemption, loss and renewal, stands as testament to the profound reality that heroism is measured not in spectacular displays of power, but in the quiet courage to maintain one's principles when the world conspires to erode them, to choose hope over cynicism when experience counsels despair, to believe in the possibility of justice when evidence suggests only chaos and meaninglessness. The badge that Gordon wore, the signal that he tended, the partnerships that he forged, all serve as symbols of something larger than any individual achievement or personal sacrifice, representing instead humanity's eternal struggle to create meaning from suffering, order from chaos, light from the encompassing darkness that threatens to consume all that is good and worthy in conscious existence. Rest now, guardian of peace, in the knowledge that true heroism echoes through eternity, inspiring others to take up the burden of protection and carry forward the sacred flame of justice through whatever trials await in tomorrow's dawn.